This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr in with an exceptional news day on this Monday. And Lisa Mateo as well with you. Good morning on YouTube, on Apple CarPlay, on Android. Just so much going on here after the history made yesterday. David Gura will appear with us. He slept under Paul Sweeney's desk last night. We're thrilled about that. Paul, every chance I get, I am going to throw in market finance investment discussion because we're overwhelmed with a wonderful 7 o'clock hour on the political moment at hand for the nation. Paul, at the end of the week, Google, Tesla, it matters.
It matters. We're going to get a lot of earnings coming up here, some tech earnings, Tom. So that's going to be a key for this market because, as we all know, this has been a tech-driven market and AI-driven market. We got futures here up about 0.5% to start off. A nice tape
to say the least. S&P futures up 30. Lisa will do that ballet in a moment. Bloomberg Surveillance always, and we thank Interactive Brokers for their support. Interactive Brokers, their bond marketplace, access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities. No markups, no built-in spreads, and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. With the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, futures higher. Tech stocks set to rebound from their worst week since April. Investors kind of looking beyond President Joe Biden ending his reelection campaign, focusing on earnings. We have Tesla, Alphabet, the first of the Magnificent Seven to report starting tomorrow. Tech-heavy NASDAQ futures up 0.8%. Dow futures up 0.1%. S&P futures up 0.5%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.51%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.22%. That's down 1 basis point. Now, traders also looking at some key economic reports, including the Fed's preferred price gauge. That's on Friday. Before that, we get a revised look on the housing market with existing home sales tomorrow, new home sales Wednesday. To earnings we go. Verizon shares just coming in right now. Shares down about a percent right now. Reported second quarter adjusted EPS came in really on par with estimates. We'll have an update for that in just a bit. Shares of Delta down 0.1%. Its CEO, apologized for canceling thousands of flights. A lot of its systems failed due to that CrowdStrike IT outage on Friday. Yeah. Aviation data Cerium actually shows Delta, the airline worst affected by that meltdown. Yes, they really took a hit. And finally, Irish budget carrier Ryanair fell the most in 4 years. It cut its outlook for ticket prices in the summer travel period. ADR is down 13%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
We will find thanks, Lisa. We'll find a point, Paul, to do this. But yeoman's duty and reporting by Michael McKee, who had to go from Jackson Hole, 14-hour delay. Granted, if you want to be in an airport with a 14-hour delay, Jackson Hole's a place to do it. And then he ended up planted in Atlanta. Lisa, as you say, Delta hardest hit. Yep. And to Mike was really valuable out on Twitter, just describing what he saw.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Absolutely. So, it's interesting, these fares we hear from these airlines, Tom. It seems like every plane I go on is full, but they're not able to get the prices they want, given some of these discount airlines out there. So
it is reasonable compared economics. To 2, 3, 4s a year. She gave us wonderful service last night. She is my favorite. Henrietta Trays is with Veda Partners, encyclopedic on the trenches of our Democrat and Republican politics, and also synthesizing that into this historic moment for the nation. Henrietta, when in doubt, I go back to Hannah Hartig at Pew Research. They do the absolute best analysis of how Paul Sweeney votes, Lisa Mateo votes, Tom Keene votes, my dog Vet Bill votes. Henrietta, all they say is turnout matters. How does the vice president get the Democrats to turn out?
That's exactly correct, especially when you're dealing with a Republican Party that is so wildly galvanized in the wake of, just the groundswell of support for Donald Trump, the assassination attempt, and the sort of momentum play that's in place for Trump right now. but is about to be migrating into the Democratic camp for the first time all cycle. The galvanization that we can register right now would come from the fundraising dollars that have come in just since lunchtime yesterday. $50 million. I think they've broken a number of the Act Blue records the Democrats have on the books. So galvanization is now going to go not just one direction towards Trump, it's going to go in two directions towards Kamala Harris as well. What we need to do beyond galvanization is see where the Democratic ticket decides to play in the Electoral College. I'd expect them to focus on North Carolina and Georgia, which are some of their best pickup states compared to the gains that Trump has made in states like Nevada in recent months.
Henrietta, when do you think the Democratic Party will come to a decision about whether to, in fact, get wholeheartedly behind Vice President Harris, or perhaps hold more of an open kind of structure here and maybe invite some other names to come into the play here? When will they make that decision?
See, this is a perfect kind of example of how you keep attention on the Democratic Party and sort of generate earned media and earned attention that promotes galvanization and name recognition. As far as I'm concerned, Kamala Harris is the Democratic nominee. So we'll have back and forth about, are we going to go into a contested convention? Is Joe Manchin going to run? I mean, I don't think Joe Manchin has any chance of winning this race. If he wants to get involved and have more of a show of a primary election cycle, I think that also behooves the party. I think there'll be a lot of that around who the Democratic nominee for vice president is going to be. If there's any kind of primary of any kind or a mini convention, it's going to be around the vice presidential pick. It's going to be Kamala Harris.
We got to interrupt the show here on YouTube Live. David's out there saying my bow tie's too small. Does it look okay today?
Looks solid to me.
It looks like, Lisa, what do you think?
I'll defer to Lisa.
We need a break there. Back to politics with Henrietta.
So, Henrietta, I guess at this extraordinarily early stage here, if you were advising Vice President Harris, how would you suggest she consider a vice presidential pick?
I mean, I think that Georgia and North Carolina represent really good options. I think the next best after that is obviously anybody from the Rust Belt states. So you're looking at Pennsylvania, Illinois, North Carolina. I don't know anybody in particular out of Georgia that stands out, but you might go through the military direction as you choose a vice presidential candidate. What's happening is really the entire Democratic Party and all the would-bes or hopefuls for 2028 are getting behind Kamala Harris right now, and they're going to help in the vetting process of the vice presidential pick. And I think that's going to be yet another jolt of enthusiasm that leads into the momentum narrative. But I think Roy Cooper in North Carolina makes a lot of sense if you're going to pursue that strategy, which I suspect they will.
Henrietta, I got 8 ways to go here. I'm going to go first to just what you addressed, which is, quote, the mystery of the military. You can think of Dwight David Eisenhower in 1952 doing better than good in a landslide over Adlai Stevenson off his contribution to World War II. There's a guy out in Arizona who has one of the toughest admits in the country, the Maritime Academy, who single-handedly waltzed his way into aeronautics at the Navy, a legit pilot who became almost on the order of John Glenn, an astronaut. I'm sorry, but Kelly of Arizona, that's a video you can run to get that turnout up, isn't it?
Absolutely. No question about it. And Arizona is a pivotal state. I think Democrats have a path with or without Arizona now if they pursue North Carolina and Georgia just in the Electoral College. But Mark Kelly in Arizona is tailor-made for this kind of a role, and I think would be a phenomenal example. I should have listed him earlier, but I was remiss, so I appreciate that.
It was a weak moment.
It's exactly right.
So, Henrietta, are you surprised that we have not heard from former President Barack Obama in terms of supporting Vice President Harris?
Not really. I think we know that Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, has been strongly behind Kamala Harris in the last couple months, has been reportedly having conversations with donors on her behalf since before Biden even dropped out. I think there is nothing but expectation that the Obamas jointly will endorse Kamala Harris, as will the rest of the Democratic, bigwigs from Oprah Winfrey on down. So I would definitely expect for that to come. It doesn't all need to come in the first day. I think there's some benefit in making it not look too choreographed. Speaker Pelosi, former Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, they all need to come out and firmly endorse as well. So to your question about whether there'd be a brokered convention of any kind, if anything, this is sort of the process.
To bring it back to Hannah's work at Pew Research, the one elasticity in our habits, how we vote, is the Hispanic vote. Describe Trump, Vance versus Harris, Michael Barr, whoever it is. Describe that polarity in the Hispanic vote.
Yeah, the black vote and the Hispanic vote are two very strong voter blocks for the Democratic Party. You know, in the black vote case, it's 25% of the entire base. So the Hispanic vote, you're really wanting to have a focus on female Latino voters, young female Latino voters. It's the young male Latino voter that's really migrated away, same as the young black voter that's migrated away. Seeing a youthful, not even 60 years old yet, Kamala Harris on the top of the ticket is going to strip away the entire argument against Joe Biden that we've had for the last year. And I think it's going to make a material impact. And we're only have data available so far on fundraising, but I assume it's going to translate to polling, particularly with females in those two demographics specifically.
Henrietta Trace, thank you for your contribution to Bloomberg Surveillance. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa, President Joe Biden has bowed out of the 2024 race and thrown his support behind Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place at the top of the Democratic ticket. Biden won 99% of the pledged delegates in the primaries and caucuses, and sources tell Bloomberg Harris's team is already working to win them over. Terry Haynes is founder of Pangea Policy.
What's going to end up having to happen is that either he releases his delegates, and then they automatically coalesce around Harris, or the rules of the convention are tweaked to speed Harris's nomination. I think it's probably going to end up being the first. They don't want to get into a situation where they open up the convention rules.
Terry Haynes of Pangea Policy. The Democratic National Convention starts August 19th. Now, if Harris is named to top the ticket, several names are being talked about to be the Democratic vice presidential pick, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and Senator Mark Kelly from the swing state of Arizona. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be in Washington today. He leaves behind a brutal war to make a speech before a joint session of Congress. Netanyahu spoke while boarding his plane.
Achieving the release of all our hostages, defeating Hamas, confronting the terror axis of Iran and its proxies.
Netanyahu also says he has known President Biden for over 40 years, and this will be an opportunity to thank him for the things he did for Israel. Finally, Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheetle will be in the hot seat when she testifies today before the House Oversight Committee. Chairman James Comer says the hearing will be the beginning of the process to get answers for the American people about the assassination attempt against former President Trump. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Michael Barr. Paul, I am wrong. I'm living in the past. We should only play songs from 1984 and today. 40 years ago, the electoral vote. Henrietta Trace pro, Tom Keene hack. Arizona, 40 years ago, 7 electoral votes. Arizona now with a little bit of growth. Good morning, Phoenix. 11 electoral votes. Arizona has the same number of votes as Massachusetts, 11 and 11. And back in 1984, when Michael Barr was younger, it was Arizona 7, Massachusetts 13.
Yep.
I don't perceive Arizona correctly.
No.
I mean, you're out there playing golf with Scottsdale.
Sure, absolutely. An extraordinary growth in that part of the country. So there you go.
We will
Mr.
see.
Kelly.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing. Call an Oppenheimer professional today. All right, futures advancing with the dollar weakening after President Joe Biden ended his re-election campaign, endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. Tech stocks, though, leading the advance. We have NASDAQ futures up about 0.8%, 166 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 68 points. S&P futures up 0.5%, or 29 points. The 2-year yield at 4.52%. That's little change. The 10-year yield at 4.22%, and that's down 1 basis point. Checking currencies. Yes, we have the dollar weaker. Japanese yen stronger at 156.76 against the dollar. The euro stronger. British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin down 0.5% at 67,000. To earnings we go. Truist Financial down 2%. Recorded lower earnings in the second quarter. Net interest income dropped. It also took significant securities losses from a balance sheet repositioning. Then we go over to Deutsche Bank's. Its wealth unit plans to hire up to a dozen private bankers in the U.S. as it chases that double-digit revenue growth. Its ADR's up about 2%. And finally, the Financial Times reporting Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Tesla, they've all cut back on summer internships. ZipRecruiter said postings fell 14% from last summer. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, the interns have really worked out great. I got to admit, the Duke interns are a little more wired in than the North Carolina.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I just would have, they come in with less of a hangover Monday morning. Paul, we got to talk markets here before we get to the next guest here. 2-year yield churning, 10-year yield churning. I'm sorry, we got to pay attention. I don't like this Trump trade stuff. Or the Harris trade. But I got to look at the markets here, and they're churning in the bond space. What do you see?
Yeah, I'm looking at the 10-year Treasury here. It's up about 5/30 seconds, just pushing the yield down slightly, 4.22% on your 10-year, Tom. And the 2-year, which is really, really tied to kind of where the Fed's going to go, it's pretty steady here at 4.51%.
The gentleman from West Virginia, just out on CNN, making a splash. Everybody on every network turned to CNN to see what Joe would say. And he says he's a centrist, moderate, conservative Democrat. David Gura joins us right now. Out with the big take. You have the big take already out this morning?
Well, my co-host Sarah Holder doing a bunch of interviews yesterday while I was on the air with you, but we put it together last night, that team working late into the evening to get that out. So it is
What's
available.
the major message? Is it
focuses on the fundraising edge that Kamala Harris has and how she's going to use that going forward. So she has a lot that she's able to get because Biden's stepping aside. And then we saw yesterday this extraordinary surge in small dollar donations to Democrats, more than $50 million raised in the last 24 hours after that announcement was made.
What'd you hear from Joe Manchin on CNN? Is he actually going to put his hat in the ring?
So we were sitting here yesterday, Tom. All of these Democrats were coming in, throwing their support behind Kamala Harris. A few did not. Didn't endorse her explicitly. Joe Manchin is one of them. He, a former Democrat, now an independent in the Senate from West Virginia. He toyed with the notion of running for president himself as an independent. Earlier this year, decided not to do that, announced he's leaving the Senate, isn't going to run for re-election. He told Casey Hunt on CNN this morning, I want the center of this country to feel like they have a voice. So he still wants there to be a process, as he puts it. He wants to know more about Kamala Harris, the vice president, where she stands on a lot of policy issues. He is not interested in a progressive candidate being the nominee for president on the Democratic side. So he wants just a process to play out where he learns more. Casey Hunt asking him, do you want to be her running mate? Do you want to be vice president? No, he's 76. He's too old. He said he knows that it's going to be somebody younger, but still very engaged with this, and I'm sure a real thorn in the side of many Democrats, as he has been over the last couple of years.
David, do we know what the process is going to be for the Democratic Party to maybe shine the light on Kamala Harris over the coming days to maybe get some momentum building behind this?
She's going to be out on the campaign trail making the case for her candidacy almost immediately. She's been doing this over the last few weeks, I'll add, and I think she's been largely keeping her head down as Joe Biden is trying to figure out what he's going to do. She's going to be obviously in the spotlight now more than she has been, not just over these last couple of weeks and months, but over these last few years. She's kind of lived, understandably, under the shadow of Joe Biden. So we'll learn more about her there. And then there's, of course, the process of how this unfolds within the Democratic Party, and we're looking ahead to that convention on August the 19th. Starting then, safe to say she's going to be making the case to a lot of these delegates who have pledged their support to Joe Biden, saying, look, he's out, he's endorsed me. You delegates should come to my side now.
So I guess, obviously, from the Democratic perspective, the most straightforward process is just to get behind Vice President Harris and let's just get to the convention and build momentum there. However, there is an other argument that says there should be more of an open competition here. How does that dynamic play out? And who's kind of in charge of that or kind of managing that?
So you have the DNC in charge of that, and look, if somebody comes forward and says, I want to run against Kamala Harris, you have this brokered convention, you would have that process taking place. Now, before Joe Biden made his decision, Jim Clyburn, the representative from South Carolina, was among a group who said, look, we could do this, we could have an open primary, we still have a few months to go until the convention takes place in Chicago. We're getting closer and closer to that point. Seems unlikely we would have the ability to do that, but we could come to Chicago and have a more dynamic, shall we say, convention than I think a lot of people expected that we would.
David, I'm reading Hannah Hartig over at Pew Research as much as I can. She and her team's incredible work on turnout. Does a guy from New Jersey who went to the Maritime Academy, flew airplanes, flew the Endeavor, etc., does Senator Kelly of Arizona, is a white guy, does he get a marginal Hispanic vote because he's from Arizona?
He has done well in his election in Arizona, so I think that there is some confidence that he could among Hispanic
First
voters.
Democrat since 1962.
There you go. Thank you for the stat. So
It's
he's
the only
definitely.
one I got today. Lisa gave it to him.
But he definitely is high on this list of maybe, 10, 12 people who were rumored to be potential
Really,
running
10 or
mates.
12?
Yeah, I think so. You look at a lot of these kind of swing state governors, Tim Walz of Minnesota, Gretchen Whitmer, of course, of Michigan, Roy Cooper of North Carolina. These are folks who were big Biden surrogates on the trail for him over these last few months. It's not like they're new to this campaign. They've been trying to make the case for President Biden to voters. They're familiar faces who know how to campaign, and I think you're going to have Kamala Harris now watching them as they campaign again, seeing with whom she might have some ease of campaigning together. Obviously, it's her decision, but to get to that point, of course, she has to be the official nominee.
And how do we get to her being the official nominee, number one, and number two, then her naming a VP? Is that all tied to the convention?
I think it's all tied to the convention. And we were here yesterday talking to all manner of people, Terry Haynes among them, saying, look, Donald Trump didn't name his running mate until the convention itself. This is not a crazy thing to think that she could go through this whole process and not pick somebody until we get to August 19th or 20th in Chicago. But an audition process is going to be underway, and I think in the coming days, Paul, we're going to get a better sense of how much support she has among rank-and-file Democrats. And I'll say, if the last 24 hours are any indication, people are lining up behind her.
Okay, I called up Shaw's Crab House last night in Chicago. I said, look, I got no place to sleep. It's exciting. Can I come out and wash dishes? And, stay with the temporary help upstairs. Shaw's Crab House is legendary. What's Chicago going to be like, David Gura?
We knew that it was going to be fragile, maybe a little bit fractious. There has been a kind of roiling protest against this current president because of the Middle East. We knew that some of that was going to bubble up in Chicago. I think as all of this unfolded post-Atlanta, we thought there could be divides within the party that could play out on the convention floor. As I said to you, Tom, I feel like this is all heading to a calmer convention, I think, than a lot of people would have feared or expected. If Kamala Harris can get people lined up behind her, if there is no viable challenger against her for this nomination, I think we could have a calmer, dare I say more quiescent, to use a word from you, Tom, convention than I think a lot of Democrats.
I stole it from Chairman Greenspan. Just quickly here then, does she move to be a moderate? Does she go, not on the edge of Joe Manchin, I don't want theater here, but she's perceived as a liberal from California. Is that true, and does she shift?
She is perceived that way, but let us not forget the beginning of her biography in politics. She was the DA in San Francisco. She was the Attorney General in California. She has that background that I think might make her a little unpalatable to many progressives today. So I think that she's going to tack more toward being a centrist, trying to get more people in the camp than fewer.
Paul, see how he uses sailing talk?
Yeah,
that's because he has a life in the summer.
Yep.
You and I wouldn't know a boat if it hit us over the head. David Gura, thank you so much.
Anchors away, Tom.
Anchors away. Thank you so much for briefing us. Are you going to go home now and sleep?
No, I'm here. If you need me to come back, I'll come back.
Okay,
if anything
good.
happens,
Make
just
a
you know where to
note.
find me.
Gura in the 9 o'clock hour. Have our interns talk to his interns.
Only the Duke ones aren't allowed.
Well, Paul, the market, we got to talk about. I got to quiescent. I don't buy the Trump trade stuff. I got $1 that's churning. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I got $1 that's churning. I mean, again, you look at the futures here, Tom, a little bit of green on the screen. The S&P up about 26 points. The NASDAQ up about 0.8% here. So keep an eye on that tech trade. We got some tech earnings starting tomorrow.
Google. I'm pumped for Google. I can't wait to see what they do. Huge mystery out there. Up 0.8%, the NASDAQ. Dow, rounded up, 41,000. I'm kidding. We have a wonderful set of voices on this historic Monday across America. On YouTube, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pointing to a higher open. This as Democrats now face that task of uniting around a new nominee. This is just weeks before their convention. Tech stocks leading the charts this morning. NASDAQ futures up 0.8%, 160 points. We have Dow futures up 0.1%, 40 points. S&P futures up about 0.5% or 27 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.51%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.22%, and that's down 1 basis point. A few companies making news. Berkshire Hathaway sold off another block of BYD shares. It's taking its stake in that Chinese automaker to under 5%. That was more than 20% 2 years ago. NVIDIA shares up more than 1%. Reuters reported the company preparing a version of its AI chips for the China market that's compatible with U.S. export controls. And finally, Boeing's new head of its commercial aircraft business. Well, she made her first appearance. Stephanie Pope said she expects a, quote, meaningful increase in 737 production rates, but she did warn that some turnaround steps will take years. Those shares up nearly 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thank you so much. Again, futures up 28. Nice spin to NASDAQ, bouncing off as well. Are we one and done? Is that the correction, Paul? Down 5%? Enough? Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. That was enough. We saw that back in...
It was there. You know, it was a distraction from the politics. It was there this weekend.
Exactly. So anyway, we got these markets showing a little bit higher here to start the week, Tom.
Yeah. We'll have to see. There's a lot of economic data as well.
Yep.
Tina Fordham, we can talk about. She populates Mayfair and the fancy climes of London. She joins us now from Fordham Global Insight. And far more importantly, as a visceral understanding of where the vice president came from. When you come out of San Francisco State, you understand San Francisco. Tina, from where you sit in the wild, liberal, progressive hell of California, where does Vice President Harris fit in?
Well, she's a hometown girl. I'm a San Francisco Bay Area native, but in London for 22 years. So I think the first thought I have is that she's definitely not going to be choosing Gavin Newsom, the California governor, as her running mate. So that's off the table. She is going to try to work hard to strengthen her bona fides as a prosecutor and as a California district attorney. She's going to try to be tough on law and order, I think. But I think what's most important here is that what we've seen with the momentum since Biden's announcement is the huge appetite for just some energy in this race.
So is that energy, how can Vice President Harris take that energy and form a real coherent message? What do you expect to hear from her as a presidential candidate?
Well, it certainly looks like her operation has hit the ground running. If you're not online or on what we now call X, you're missing out, because you can see in real time how her campaign headquarters, virtually been set up with some branding echoes that are very familiar to Gen Z and younger people. There are a lot of, politically homeless people, disenfranchised constituencies, never Trumpers, people who are open to ideas. And I wonder if the compressed time frame doesn't actually work a little bit to her advantage.
So what do you think? I mean, I guess one of the first decisions she needs to make as a candidate is to select a vice presidential candidate. How do you think she'll go there?
Midwestern white guy.
Okay.
I think that has to be the choice. I don't think it'll be Pete Buttigieg. That's too much change, too much, perceived progressiveness on one ticket. But Tom mentioned Mark Kelly, a senator from Arizona, NASA astronaut, naval officer, pilot, husband of Gabby Giffords. He would be an interesting choice. And obviously Arizona is a key battleground state. Bashir is another interesting candidate, could go head to head with J.D. Vance on Appalachia. There are some good names in the mix. Right. But that's the kind of ticket that I would expect to see, someone who would complement Harris and ideally could deliver a big swing state.
Tina Fordham, we are advantaged at Bloomberg with Wendy Benjaminson, who is in Washington, D.C. She, folks, is the definitive old school newspaper editor, supporting young reporters, nurturing people. And I asked her this question yesterday, Tina. You are, without question, the most qualified transatlantic voice on this. In England, nobody's sweating that there's Prime Minister May, or even the train wreck that was Prime Minister Truss. No one's sweating Marine Le Pen is a fixture within French politics. or the reality of Angela Merkel, Paul, what was it, 14 years, I think,
Yep.
as chancellor. Tina Fordham, why does America have so much trouble electing a woman president from both party persuasions?
It's remarkable, and I'm not sure, guys, that Americans really appreciate what an outlier we are in being seemingly unable to elect a female head of state. As you say, the UK has had 3 female prime ministers, one only for a few minutes, but nevertheless, and numerous OECD countries have had. So the US is an outlier. But again, I do think the wrong question is America ready for a Black female president? I think the question has to be in this, fairly high stakes race, whether the United States wants to reelect Donald Trump or wants broad political continuity, which a Harris plus Midwestern guy ticket would bring.
Tina, how do you think Kamala Harris will stack up against one-on-one against former President Trump, whether it be in debates or just the day-to-day messaging?
Well, the first thing is that as a former prosecutor, she's tough. Watch the replays of her questioning on during these Supreme Court hearings for Brett Kavanaugh. She's perhaps not as smooth and slick as a Bill Clinton, but she's a tough questioner and respondent. What is her messaging going to be? I'm not Donald Trump. Does it need to be much more advanced than that? She's the continuity candidate. Interesting to me, though, was that Trump seemed to be, backpedaling from the next debate, September 10th. Did you see that?
Yeah.
And also complaining that they want their money back as they prepared for a campaign against a different guy.
Tina, this is just so important. My theme today, folks, is turnout. It's not my opinion. It's fancy people like Tina Fordham saying turnout really matters. Tina Fordham, how do you suggest the former president and the senator from Ohio enhance their turnout after what we saw in a 90-minute convention speech and after what, all the emotion of the assassination attempt and that? How do they enhance their turnout against the vice president?
Probably by stoking fear about what she might do. The difficulty for them is that they are going to have to resort to some pretty unpleasant language and tactics to do so. Do their supporters care? It's hard to say, but it can't be underestimated how they will have been somewhat blindsided about this change in the ticket. Now Donald Trump's the old guy in the race. And can Trump continue with the momentum he's had in attracting, Black men and others? The constituencies that were pro-Obama, that came out for Obama, weren't coming out for Biden. Will they turn up for Harris? That's what the next 6 weeks in particular is going to be about. It's also why I think the shorter time frame just helps. Less time for everyone to get bored.
I agree with this. It's very British, okay? And only Tina Fordham in London could say that. Tina, fabulous. Thank you so much. Tina Fordham, of course, iconic at Citigroup, Fordham Global Insights out of London as well. Quickly here, Paul Sweeney, I put this out, just a single snippet from Mike Allen's morning note at Axios. Carville of New Orleans, Carville, a Democrat. Quote, the most thunderous sound in politics is the sound of a turning page.
Yep, and there you go.
That to me is a single sentence. I see that equates to post All-Star break, the sound of the turning page of the Detroit Tigers. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Joe Biden has dropped out of the 2024 race for the White House. The president quickly endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris and encouraged his party to unite behind her. Senator Chris Coons, a longtime Biden ally, told ABC he deeply respects the president's decision.
This was a very hard choice, but as has always been the case with our Joe Biden, he made a choice that was in the best interest of the American people.
Biden's announcement could change the Trump campaign strategy. The two were supposed to go head-to-head in a September debate. Michael Whatley, the chair of the Republican National Committee, insists the former president will take on any opposition.
Whether it's Kamala Harris or it's anybody else, they have doubled down on every single one of the policies that we've seen the Biden and Harris administration adopt over the last 4 years.
And this just in, according to CBS, that Joe Manchin says that he was thinking about trying to get into the race, but now he has said that he is not going to. He has switched from being a Democrat to an independent, and he was going to switch back to his party again. The announcement comes just over a week after the attempted assassination of Trump at a Pennsylvania rally. The U.S. Secret Service Director, Kimberly Cheadle, will testify before a congressional committee. House Oversight Chairman James Comer says today's hearing will be the beginning of the process to get answers for the American people, including how the gunman made it on top of a roof. Cheadle says her agency is reviewing its actions. More than a dozen congressional Republicans, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, say Cheadle needs to resign.
Director Cheadle has shown the world and said that she has different priorities. She needs to go.
Speaker Johnson was on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Finally, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be in Washington today. Before leaving on his plane for the U.S., Netanyahu told reporters that he will give an address to a joint session of Congress on Capitol Hill.
I will address, for the fourth time, both houses of Congress as the Prime Minister of Israel. I will seek to anchor the bipartisan support that is so important for Israel.
Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Josh Wingrove with incredibly profound reporting out for Bloomberg News. And this is what matters. I mean, we're not doing the newspapers today, so we're doing it right now. Newspapers with Lisa Mateo.
Oh boy!
You can tell someone by their pizza toppings.
Oh yeah.
You can, you know. Don't tell me
No,
gluten
that's true.
free.
That is true.
You can tell someone by what they order. The vice president, I'm sorry, forget about, me being fair and unbalanced. I am. She loves anchovies on her pizza.
Oh, no.
I gotta go there.
That's
Michael, you put anchovies on your pizza?
I tried anchovies one time on my pizza, and I said one time. And I might as well have grabbed a bunch of sardines and put it on the pizza as well.
I mean, you're driving a Vespa, Paul. You got to have anchovies on your
you can't
pizza.
do that.
Black olives?
No, not. I mean, we'll go sausage, pepperoni, onions.
Ooh,
Throw it on
meat
there,
lovers.
or we just go plain. I'm happy.
Yeah, I'm with
do
plain.
the veggies.
I wonder what President Trump
You
has
notice
on
a
his
theme
pizza.
there for me.
Yes, the meat lovers.
Yes.
You think President Trump? I mean, I'm trying to scoop of vanilla ice cream on his pizza. I don't know.
I don't
That's
know.
a tough
But
one.
yeah,
I go with-
that says a lot. You're right, Tom. It says a lot what you put on top of your pizza.
It does. I mean, this goes to the depth of Bloomberg reporting. I mean, Jordan Fabian, probably with team coverage on this. Josh Wingrove, what pizza topping does Vice President Harris
What's
like?
on yours?
What's on mine? We usually go with a basic cheese because that's what the kids want. It's boring.
Oh, come on.
And
No, just put extra cheese on it. You're good.
The middle child likes black olives, so I'll go there with anchovies.
Okay.
I like anchovies on a pizza.
You do?
Yeah, they make the olive and the martini better. Thank you, Josh Wingrove, for reporting from Washington. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. NASDAQ futures leading the charge this morning, up about 0.9%, 179 points. This as investors look to tech earnings. We have Tesla and Alphabet reporting tomorrow. S&P futures up 0.5%, 30 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, or 68 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.51%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.22%, and that's down 2 basis points. To commodities, we have spot gold higher, 2,401 an ounce. We have Brent crude $82 a barrel, WTI crude $79 a barrel. Few companies making news. Krispy Kreme sold its majority ownership stake in Insomnia cookies. Oh, those are dangerous. It's a transaction representing $300. Oh, they're good. It's my treat. $350 million total enterprise value. Krispy Kreme shares up about 0.5%. And then from donuts to those who might not eat them, you have Bloomberg reporting Ozempic copycats. They're raising safety risks for patients. The problem is that the drugs are made by so-called compounding pharmacies, so they don't have to go through that same approval process that is required by brand names or generic medications. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. David Rosenberg up in Toronto, Paul, and we got to stop before Dr. Vinjamuri on this. Rosenberg of Toronto, quote, no perceptible market impact from Biden's exit.
Okay.
And that to me is just as important of what it says and what it does not say. Life goes on.
Life goes on. And
it's
the S&P,
America.
Yep. S&P futures up 0.5%.
Churchill, I think, out in St. Louis a few years ago, somehow America makes the right decision. And we're figuring that out. Whether it's Republican or Democrat, folks. Thank you, David Rosenberg, for that direct comment. To vamp on that as well is someone hugely qualified. Leslie Vinjamuri out of the Wesleyan Complex is at Chatham House in London, hugely prestigious when she speaks on America, the United Kingdom, and the continent. We're thrilled that Dr. Vinjamuri could join us this morning. Leslie, the market really hasn't moved across equities, bonds, currencies, commodities. What does that signal of our political system?
Well, I guess some sense that this is going to be continuity, that there's a sort of wait and see attitude, probably also. It doesn't feel like continuity to those of us who are looking at the political world. It seems like a rather significant moment of change. But I guess, if you're trying to game this out from the markets, that really, whether it's Joe Biden or likely Kamala Harris, the economic policy is likely to be one that's continuous.
Lord O'Neill, Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs, with his contribution to Chatham House, told me that people like you at Chatham House are still dipping a quill in the ink pot to write when you can. And the answer, Leslie Vinjamuri, is Trump and Harris have to deal with the modern media. This isn't Eisenhower-Stevenson of 1952. How do they deal with the speed of news today?
Yeah, this is extraordinary. I mean, and every single time somebody endorses or uses a specific word, it's on the media. People will now be watching every move that Kamala Harris makes as she takes her campaign forward and looking to see whether the Democrats unify behind her. And they're going to do that all not only on national television, but on world television. And people are also looking to see how Donald Trump will signal his response. Clearly, they're going to have to shift their campaign strategy. I think for many people, they will be trying to get a sense of who the vice presidential candidate will be for Kamala Harris, assuming she moves forward, which certainly looks likely. And also what kind of leader she would be. What would her policies be, not only at home, which I think is more well known, but especially on the global stage. And here she's relatively unknown and has relatively little experience. That said, she's had a very strong voice. With some difficult moments, not least in those early days of her role as vice president when it came to immigration and the southern border.
Leslie, was this a good weekend for the Democratic Party? Was it a weekend where they turned the page, or was it a weekend showing the disarray of the party? How do you view this past weekend and what happened?
I think the disarray for the Democratic Party played out over the last 3 weeks since that very difficult presidential debate. And yesterday was really a moment of clarity where President Biden made a decision that people had been waiting for and wondering about for quite some time, and where he quickly thereafter endorsed Kamala Harris. And then we saw many leading figures, including some of those who would have run against her, saying that they supported her. And so I think people are breathing, tentatively a sigh of relief, knowing that that moment is over, understanding that there's still great uncertainty ahead as to whether or not she can actually compete. And, we watched the Republican National Convention. We watched former President Trump and J.D. Vance double down on a very powerful, but actually a very narrow agenda, and speak really primarily to their base, and broadening that out will be essential.
That's exactly where I wanted to go. I mean, I'm playing off of fabulous research on who votes, how we vote, when we vote, from Pew Research. And Dr. Vinjamuri, everything's focused on Harris now. I get that. It's in the news. It's new. It's fresh, ratings and all that. Forget about it. How does President Trump and Senator Vance move center off the message of Milwaukee to get the marginal vote? Or do you perceive they have absolutely no interest in doing that?
I think they actually do have some interest. If you've watched President Trump move his position, sort of dial it down a little bit on abortion, for example, he's tried to distance himself from Project 2025, which many people have viewed as very radical or extreme. And so there's already signs that he recognizes, Donald Trump is always looking to see where he can make something stick and where he can get a win. He likes to think of himself as doing deals. And I suspect that they are really, recalibrating in a very significant way. If they're smart, they will recognize the diversity that J.D. Vance's wife brings to the broader platform. Not officially, of course, but that's a very significant female presence in the platform. They're low on female presence at the top, and now with Kamala Harris on the ticket, that is a significant point of a difference between the two parties. So there's a lot of things but they are going to be recalibrating. They clearly chose J.D. Vance in part in contrast to President Biden's age.
Leslie, should voters read anything into the fact that we have not yet heard from former President Obama?
No, not at all. President Obama is wise to know that he shouldn't get out in front of the party. He has a very specific role to play. He's tended to come in on these major decisions once he can read the room and then try to shift it subtly. He has said that he believes that the Democrats should have a process for the next candidate, but he hasn't said an open process. And that's a very important distinction for a former president who chooses his words with great care, is very meticulous and detail-oriented. So I think he is waiting to see where the party goes. The one thing that all Democrats at that level, certainly there aren't many at that level, but all Democrats know is that the most important thing, the single most important thing for the party is to choose a candidate and to be absolutely unified behind that candidate. People have watched the party disintegrate. It's looked incoherent for 3 weeks, and now they really need momentum if they're going to stand a chance of victory in November.
Leslie, thank you so much. Dr. Vinjamuri with the Chatham House in London in the United Kingdom. That was great. Tina Fordham and Leslie Vinjamuri back to back. I mean, that's the team's really been working all night on this through our specials yesterday and to give you the coverage here this morning across this nation. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Somebody said, how can we help you with this? And that's the number one thing, folks. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Out on Apple CarPlay, a new update there coming. Android Auto, a new update there coming. There's a habit there as well. Motown. Martha Reeves was different, always different. We think about Linda Ronstadt and what she did with Heatwave. It was Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. I mean, it was a certain sound back then, a sound that we've captured for next to forever. We're going to feature that right now. Do some Motown here today as well. Trump, maybe Harris. Stay with us.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr with us as well. We're all here on a Monday, a busy week ahead. Tech earnings later in the week is what I'm focused on. And of course, we are focused on, yes, our international relations, Mr. Netanyahu in Washington, I believe it's Wednesday, but our politics of the moment, extraordinary. We're going to digress from that up top, which is a good and beautiful thing, but we are focused on Washington and on our election November 5th, as all of you are. Paul, I didn't even see the news come out yesterday on Mr. Biden. I got a phone call. I'm sitting there in my recording studio, and there's this phone call from Sparta. And
no, that's not good.
This is like either goodbye, Tom, or whatever.
Get in here.
And through a, I thought it was fine that it was through a printed memo. People wanted a speech and all, but we'll release it through a memo.
We'll get there.
I can see it.
Yeah, so is a team.
So there we are. Futures up 31, up 32 right now. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing. Call an Oppenheimer professional today, and we thank Oppenheimer for their support as well. From the Interactive Broker Studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got green on the screen. Tech stocks set to rebound from their worst week since April. Investors kind of focus on earnings right now. We have the NASDAQ futures up nearly 1%, 189 points. S&P futures up 0.5%, 33 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, or 63 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.52%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.22%, and that's down 1 basis point. On the economic calendar this week, traders looking to the Fed's preferred price gauge. That's on Friday. But before that, we have existing home sales tomorrow, new home sales on Wednesday. Thursday, the government's report on second quarter GDP. To earnings we go. Verizon shares down nearly 3%. Reported operating revenue missed estimates. Fewer people upgraded wireless equipment. And then you have shares of Delta down 0.5%. Its CEO apologized for canceling thousands of flights. A lot of its system failed due to that CrowdStrike IT outage on Friday. An aviation data firm Cirium, it shows Delta was actually the airline most affected by that issue. And then you have Irish budget carrier Ryanair. Well, it fell the most in 4 years, cutting its outlook for ticket prices in the summer travel period. ADRs down 13%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Paul. Can I just say, all of us are focused on the politics in the news yesterday, and our next guest, no, he was not. I think it's fabulous that the number 5 person at the Open in Scotland had one round that was a 75, and the number 6 person, Shane Lowry, had a round of 77. They're almost as bad as Damien Sassower.
That's exactly. It's tough out there when you're out there when the wind's whipping 40, 50 miles an hour, and then you lose your ball, which our next guest is familiar with. Damien Sassower, Chief EM Credit Strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence, joins us. Hey, Damien, in your world of emerging markets, what's it like? What do traders think about when you've got churn in the U.S. political system like we had over the weekend here? A big sea change coming out of the Democratic Party. Does that ripple through your world?
Yeah, it does. I think it depends on which part of the asset class you're looking at, though, Paul. Anything that's dollar denominated. Emerging market credit, for example, you have to be focused on what's going on here in the U.S. and the geopolitical picture, even EM local. But I think when you look at local currency or foreign denominated emerging market debt, or equities for that matter, what you really got to be looking at is some of the domestic policies. And overnight, I don't know if you caught this, China cut rates. And so rate cuts are coming to an emerging market near you, Paul. And it's not just China. We have Hungary tomorrow. I think we have, Canada's not an emerging market, but they may cut as well on Wednesday. So, we see stimulus being injected into these less developed economies. And it's something for me and investors to take a note at.
So in an emerging market, I don't know if you could generalize, when you do have a central bank cutting rates, does that have a similar impact in an emerging market as it does here? Because the markets move here, when the Fed is changing rate policy?
So I think it's about policy rate expectations, Paul. And Tom, you can cut in anytime you like here. But if you look at the forward strip, which is what markets are projecting in terms of central bank activity over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, especially in China, it's downward sloping. It means that more cuts, more stimulus is expected in China relative to the U.S. What that means is that if you're a U.S. dollar investor and you're investing in a Chinese asset, you can take advantage of that negative sloping forward curve by carrying on a currency hedged basis and getting yields that are more than Treasury bills here in the U.S. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
AAA rated non-negotiable certificates of deposit, basically bank deposits in China are yielding 6+% for 1 year money on a hedged basis in the U.S. So that's a nice juicy yield over T-bills. That's about 150, 200 bips over T-bills. So that's something the institutions are taking advantage of here.
Gary Schilling, 101. There's an ambiguity to an inflation vector. So if we have global disinflation in place, is it a good disinflation for EM? Or does it signal GDP slowdown?
It's so funny. I mean, this is exactly what I was looking at over the weekend. You're trying to kind of spec out what a red wave means for emerging markets. And what a red wave, what I can't get around is it's bearish for commodities. It's bearish for industrial metals, and it's bearish for energy.
Tariffs?
Well, I think so. I mean, you can't look back at Trump's first term and say, okay, we're going to see a repeat of that, because Trump's first term, he first focused on the tax cuts, which is actually bullish for commodity prices. And then it was when the tariffs hit, which was bearish. I think this time you might see a bit of a reversal. I think the markets are going to kind of grab hold of the tariff story, the tariff narrative first. I mean, we're seeing that already. And so if you look at, for example, China refined copper imports, they surged to a record in June because they're not consuming anything at home, and smelters are looking outward and exporting, their refined copper out, to the rest of the world. This is bearish basically for commodity prices, for copper prices. So, and I think you're going to see something similar, drill baby drill, for energy prices here in the U.S. Now, these are multi-year kind of things that need to take place. It's not going to happen overnight, but the market's going to rush to price this in. And again, bearish for commodities is not necessarily a good recipe for emerging market assets.
So what are the more, I guess, better yielding assets that you're looking at right now? Is it still the Mexico and some of those markets?
I mean, so Mexico has given up quite a bit. Brazil's given up quite a bit. You're right to point that out, Paul. So we have been really focused on more of those, I guess, middle of the road yielders. So India, Indonesia come to mind, the Philippines, these are, but you see, this is the thing now. They're competing with G10. They're competing with Australia. They're competing with New Zealand. So, and those are developed markets. So how much yield pickup are you really getting by turning? So if you are really a carry-focused investor, you're looking for as much incremental yield as you can get, you're going to look back to Brazil. You're going to look back to Mexico, to Colombia, but they're very vulnerable economies in this environment.
For mere mortals that are not leading the romance of Damien Sassower's world, is Harris-Trump, if we get Harris, let's be sure, folks, that she's not the nominee yet.
Right.
Is that dollar resilient, or does that describe the weak dollar? Clearly, we can say President Trump wants.
Well, I think the markets are really still going to have difficulty associating anything other than it's all dollar positive, really, in my mind. Except
and dollar resilient.
Yeah, dollar resilient, extraordinary dollar. Because look, I mean, it's the dollar smile. If you do see some sort of real kind of risk-off moment, you're going to see the dollar rally.
Explain that. That's jargon on a Monday.
Yeah. Okay.
He's out of control.
So sorry, guys. Sorry.
I haven't smiled.
I apologize to your audience, Tom.
I have not smiled since Nixon was president. What's a dollar smile?
So the dollar smile means that the dollar will outperform when the U.S. is growing faster than the rest of the world, and it will outperform when the U.S. is, on its back, melting down. So in both instances, you're going to see dollar outperformance. It's really when you have this meddling sort of U.S. economy, this sort of sluggish 1% to 2% growth economy. It's, maybe growing less than other regions like Europe. That's when you start to see the euro outperform the dollar, when you start to see emerging market currencies outperform the dollar. But that runway is getting narrower by the day.
Paul, get one more in here. He's paid by the syllable.
Paid by the syllable. So where's the risk out there in your emerging market? Is it just country by country by country, or is there a bigger thematic risk out there?
Well, I think you hit on it, right? The two big risks are, U.S. yields and the dollar. Those are the two factors which have been driving, forget about emerging markets, most asset classes. So, God knows where either of those things are going next. I mean, anyone who can tell you where the dollar or the 10-year are headed tomorrow, I'd love to meet that person, because I've never met somebody who can do that with any sort of confidence. But This is, sorry, Tom, you have something to say here? I don't want to.
No, I got to go.
Okay.
We're running a show here.
Okay, sorry. So, I mean, look, I think that's what you have to focus on. You have to focus on the U.S., obviously, on what a Harris, a presumptive, but I think it's a red wave. I mean, that's really what we're pricing, and that seems to be the base case. That's what the polls are looking at. I can't ignore it. I have to look at what that means for my markets, and that's what I'm focused on.
Do you know what's great about Damien? He's reverse WFH. Okay,
Yep.
He comes in Monday and Friday
Exactly.
and takes Tuesday, Wednesday, and
Don't
Thursday
tell anybody.
off
Don't tell
to
my
go to
boss
the golf
that.
course. Damien Sassower, thank you for joining us in the studio on a Monday. He's worked 6 days a week with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin says he is not running for the White House now that President Joe Biden announced that he is out of the 2024 race. According to CBS, Manchin, the former Democrat, now an independent, calls for a contested Democratic primary. The Democrats' fundraising arm, Act Blue, says it raised more than $50 million in the hours after Biden left the presidential race, and Vice President Harris inherits the Biden campaign's $96 million war chest. Harris faces a sprint to bring Democrats in line behind her campaign. Bloomberg's Laura Davison has more from Washington.
Some of the key members of the party, folks like, former President Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, those folks are holding their fire for now on endorsing her. There's a sense that, that top officials in the party want to make sure that anyone who wants to come forward can. But of course, there's not much time. The nominating convention is less than a month away. And there's, just a very short window, both for, a nominee to be selected, a running mate, and then also to, really start campaigning hard against Donald Trump.
Bloomberg's Laura Davidson in the nation's capital. Voters are talking about Biden's announcement. This Republican voter lives in Phoenix, Arizona.
I still feel like Trump's going to do better in the race. I don't really support her values.
Meanwhile, NAACP board member Michael Curry is among those praising President Biden for stepping out of the race and endorsing Vice President Harris.
If it turns out to be Kamala Harris, then we need to move using the words of Brown v. Board, with deliberate speed to make sure that she is the President of the United States.
Michael Curry with the NAACP. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be in Washington today to give an address to Congress. Netanyahu spoke before boarding the plane.
I will tell my friends on both sides of the aisle that regardless who the American people choose as their next president, Israel remains America's indispensable and strong ally in the Middle East.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Last night in this hellacious blur of news, there dropped in my mailbox a modest essay from Lucas Shaw of Hollywood and Vine in Los Angeles. Paul, it was absolutely stunning, Lucas Shaw's report on Apple, I guess, doing good and winning awards, and to cut to the chase, no one's watching it.
No.
What a world turned upside down. They won an Academy Award,
Yep.
et cetera, and the numbers are minuscule.
That's been the pitch of the big broadcast networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS for the last 25 years. Yes, our audience is down 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%, and yes, we're going to charge you 5, 6, 7% more than we charged you last year. But where else are you going to go? We're the tallest in the room. Everybody else, all these cable networks that you talk about and that are so great, they can't even deliver the audience that we deliver, even if our audience is declining. Now you take that to streaming, and it's on a factor of 100.
We will talk about this through the week and, frankly, through the year. Very important. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokerage Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advance while the dollar weakens after President Joe Biden ended his re-election campaign, endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. Tech stocks leading the advance, up 0.9%, 188 points. S&P futures up 0.5%, 32 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, or 58 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.52%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.22%, and that's down 1 basis point. Let's check in with currencies. Dollar stronger, Japanese yen, dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger at 156.91 against the dollar. We have the euro stronger, British pound stronger, Bitcoin down about 0.5% at around 67,000. To commodities, spot gold lower, 2,394 an ounce, Brent crude $82 a barrel, WTI crude $79 a barrel. To earnings we go. Truist Financial down more than 1%. It recorded lower earnings in the second quarter. Net interest income, that dropped. It also took a significant securities loss from a balance sheet repositioning. And Deutsche Bank's wealth unit plans to hire up to a dozen private bankers in the U.S. as it chases that double-digit revenue growth. Its ADR is up 2%. And finally, a new bank rate study says the best state to retire in 2024 is Delaware. It's followed by West Virginia and Georgia. New York came in 49th. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
Sparta has retired to Delaware. He's working like a one-day work week.
Yep.
I've never been. I guess it's gorgeous.
I like the beaches.
Out on the beaches.
Yeah. And the University of Delaware is really a nice school.
Yeah, it's a university of Liz Ann Saunders.
Yeah,
I mean, that's all there is to it.
Fighting
Can I
Bullhens.
tell you how much I hate Dirk Willer? I mean, can we even go there?
Join the club
right now? So when you get an endorsement, and when Nora Rubini says it's a required read, and you're a nerd, and you're like reading, I'm reading the Peterson Institute's FX Dynamics book right now. It's my Jackson whole book. It's just great. Dirk Willer wrote a book that everyone on global Wall Street hates with a passion. Trading fixed income and FX in emerging markets. And here's the key, here's the secret, Paul. A practitioner's guide, which means every page has math on it. You got to struggle with. Joining us right now from Citigroup, a legend, Dirk Willer here with a book that, you know, I'm sorry, my eyes just glazed over as well. Does the math, I'm kidding, the math in your classic book, is it operative right now?
You know, the rule of thumb is for every formula, you halve the readership. And so I actually did keep the formulas to a minimum. But it works, it held up surprisingly well. I mean, whenever you do these studies and you figure out what the price should be for most possible situations that are coming your way, I think, you know, some rules will obviously not work anymore. A lot is still working. And especially we have a big chapter on elections. And this election is, you know, playing out, or could be playing out according to the textbook, I would say.
In a core algebraic function, there's a Greek letter off the right side called epsilon. It's a pretty little e, folks. It's like, you know, what you use in your Christmas card or whatever. What's the epsilon look like right now? What's the unknown, the systemic risk that's out there?
Yeah, and there are plenty of unknown unknowns, I would say, but I think the pattern that's important to focus on is that the market doesn't need to know everything, right? The point is, if things are tight enough, and if one of the two candidates has a platform that could be impactful on markets in certain ways, then you have to put the risk premium into the market no matter who wins. And 2016 was actually really extraordinary that it broke the pattern because everything happened after the election. That's not what usually happens. Usually all the action is going into the election, and into the election the market puts in risk premium, and that's, I think, what we're going to see into this election. And then what happens after the election, you know, more often than not, most of the risk is already priced and everyone goes about their merry ways, and not as much happens as is feared. But going into it, it's very hard to believe the race will not be tight enough that the market has to put risk premium into the asset prices.
So as head of Citi's global macro strategy team, how did you and your team kind of, I don't know, change your view, alter your view, if at all, over what we saw from President Biden stepping back from the re-election? How did that change your discussion?
No, I think the interesting thing is a bunch of Trump trades people have been trying to do, right? And they're pulling back a little bit today, but not that much. And I think there are three reasons for that. And one reason is obviously that, broadly speaking, the final impact on the election is a little bit unclear. I don't think people are revising. Certainly, if you looked at predicted, right? I mean, Trump is still running at 60% or something like that, so not that much change. The second reason was, though, that a lot of the trades were difficult to put on that early. The rule of thumb is actually that, you know, in EM elections, 3 to 4 months before the election starts to matter. In US elections, it starts to matter 1 or 2 months before. So at this stage, where we haven't quite figured out yet the Fed path, the market was somewhat resistant to putting on a lot of these Trump trades, in particular trades that would not also benefit from a more dovish Fed.
In the time that we've got left, we've got to go to your wheelhouse skill, which is Russia. Is Russia still a frontier economy? Or with the war in Ukraine and some form of a fractured prosperity, I guess I would put it, are they a legit EM country right now?
And obviously with the sanctions, it's uninvestable, right? And so the question is whether the election will make a difference to that. And if the elections were to make a difference, and if Trump were to deliver on this idea that he can create a peace treaty very quickly, Russia would be back very quickly. And it depends a little bit what the treaty would look like, but I cannot imagine that there would be a treaty that doesn't remove the sanctions to at least a large extent, and then it would be back. It's just, you know, the investors are not that fearful necessarily of the Russian story, but very fearful of the reaction of policymakers in the US and in the Eurozone to any investments in Russia and so forth. So that is much more the problem than I think Russia itself. And things could change if the war changes.
All right, so that's Russia. How about China? What's the current thinking on China from your shop?
Yeah, they're in a very difficult position, right? So basically, it's a two-tier economy. You have a balance sheet recession going on, and that lasts a long, long time, and you have to throw everything at it that you can possibly do, and that's not what the Chinese are doing. Then you have a hyper-competitive external sector who is basically exporting very competitive products. A Trump victory will make it much harder to gain any market share in the US. Europe will be the dumping ground for the Chinese exports, but even the Europeans will fight back a little bit, much less than the Americans, but a little bit, right? And so China is in a very tricky position. I mean, we think, especially into the election, investors will avoid Chinese assets. Afterwards, we have to see how much risk premiums are in the market.
Dirk, thank you. Dirk Willer with us this morning, Global Head Macro Asset Allocation, Citigroup. With us. And seriously, folks, the book is a classic. It's like a required read if you want to understand the dynamics of the emerging market space. Paul, I failed this morning. This is the first time I've mentioned it, folks. We're such a blur here with all the politics that's going on. In the next half hour, for the entire half hour, Ed Yardeni joins us. Nice. And this is important, folks. If you've gone through the weekend saying, what am I going to do
in this market,
et cetera, should we change, should we stay, should we go? And the answer is Dr. Yardeni has been way out front on this bull market, and particularly the second leg of the bull market. And he has an extrapolation of optimism and prosperity second to none on the street right now. This is without question already on a Monday at 8:24. Our conversation of the week, I think, without question.
All right, we get him for two segments here, and we'll love to get his thoughts on kind of what the events we saw over the weekend. Does that alter his outlook at all? And we're getting right smack in the middle of tech earnings here, Tom, this week. So that's going to be likely moving markets.
I will be riveted to it.
Yeah, and then, you know, we've got the chip makers towards a little bit later in the cycle here. So there's a lot for this market to digest. What we haven't talked about is the Federal Reserve, because there's been so much political news out there, Tom, and there's going to be a big wave of earnings news this week, and plenty for the market to digest.
Free cash flow, Google, $43 billion just after the pandemic started. Modeled out to next year, it's more than a double to 92. From 43 to 92 billion modeled out for the end of 2025.
What do you do with that amount of free cash flow? I guess you just buy back stock.
It's what it is. Thank you to Michael Mabusian for giving us guidance on this. Out 30 years, and these companies are different. We'll talk to Ed Yardeni about that. The market lifts. The NASDAQ up just over 1%. S&P futures up 34. VIX coming in, but still above 16, elevated 16.15. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pointing to a higher open. Traders look past President Biden's executive and focus on tech stocks, which are leading the charge. NASDAQ futures up 1%, 207 points. We have S&P futures up 0.6%, 37 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 83 points. The two-year yield, 4.51%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.22%, and that's down 2 basis points. Few companies making news. NVIDIA. Reuters reporting that the company is preparing a version of its AI chips for the China market that's actually compatible with U.S. export controls. NVIDIA shares up 2%. And Berkshire Hathaway sold off another block of BYD shares, taking its stake in the Chinese automaker to under 5%. That was more than 20% 2 years ago. And finally, Boeing's head of its new commercial aircraft business. Well, she made her first appearance. Stephanie Pope said she expects a, quote, meaningful increase in 737 production rates. But she did warn that those turnaround steps, well, they'll take several years. Shares up nearly 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Thank you for watching on YouTube. The live chat, very, very helpful to say the least. It takes 2 screens of a Bloomberg to bring in the economic coverage this week. We start out light. Chicago Fed National Activity Index. It's elevated a little bit. I don't know what to do with that number. It's a good reason to have lunch with Diane Swank. But the rest of it is a huge deal, including GDP. We'll get to that with Ed Yardeni in a moment. Our economic work, led by Michael McKee, if he can ever get out of airport terminals after the debacle on Friday. Our economic indicators brought to you by Commonwealth. Commonwealth supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio. Small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support in technology. For this half hour, Edward Yardeni, Yardeni Research, and I'm not going to mince words, folks. He writes like it's still C.J. Lawrence of a few years ago, and you are advantaged with the Yardeni report that comes out. He's even got some people helping him out now. He was, like doing it by himself. And we're thrilled that Ed Yardeni could join us now with his optimism on the American experiment. Ed, reframe that to begin with right now. Do you actually model out, if I extrapolate, a Dow Jones Industrial Average over 50,000 a number of years out?
Yeah, I think we could get to 60,000 by the end of the year. We're at 40,000. It's not a stretch to believe that over the remaining decade we could get to 60,000. And I've got the S&P 500 going to 8,000 by the end of the decade. So it's a bull market. Look, just take a look at a long-term chart of the S&P 500, and what you see is that bear markets occur every now and then, but they don't last very long, and that the fundamental trend of the market is upwards along with the economy.
So, Yed, to get to those kind of levels that you're talking about, does it have to be a tech-led U.S. stock market?
No, it doesn't. Though since the beginning of the decade, I've noted that there's a certain rhyming between the 2020s and the 1920s. And I do think that there are similarities. Hopefully it doesn't end as badly as it did in the 1920s. But for now, I think we're in the roaring 2020s. The technology environment is very conducive to that. But look, I think every company now is a technology company that you either make it or you use it. If you don't use it, you lose it. So I think technology is a major driver of the economy, but it doesn't have to be that technology companies are the only ones that benefit.
We had a little bit of I think a lot of folks are calling a rotation maybe out of some of those tech names into some other sectors, maybe even in some small caps had some real strong outperformance over the past couple of weeks. What'd you make of that?
Yeah, well, it's been a very confusing couple of weeks. It really started, I think, on July 11th with the better than expected CPI convincing everybody, including the Fed, that they were going to lower interest rates probably in September. And so instead of just kind of debating how many rate cuts will eventually occur, now there's almost 100% probability agreement that they're going to start cutting in September, and that led to a tremendous rotation out of the Magnificent Seven and into some of the smaller cap stocks. But I think the other event that occurred is the Biden administration announced that they were going to take some draconian measures against companies that sell semiconductor equipment to China. So it's been a whole mix of things going on here.
Ed Yardeni, I want to go back to introductory economics at Yale. You get there and you got to toss out a core equation, Y equals C plus I plus G, and you throw in international exports minus imports. Right. You have been a multi-decade optimist. There's no question about that. You found your moments of gloom, but they're rare, rare, rare. Once again, Atlanta GDP now, a present indicator, tells the gloom crew they're wrong. Where in that core economic function did the gloom crew get growth wrong?
Well, look, I think that it really started in 2022 when the Fed started raising interest rates. March 22 through the summer of 2023, the Fed raised the Fed funds rate by 525 basis points from 0 to 5.25%. I think where the gloom crew was perfectly logical was in expecting that would cause a recession. It kind of makes sense. You get that kind of tightening, you get a recession. I think what they missed, though, is that we started at zero. In other words, sure, the Fed tightened, but they also normalized. I mean, it was zero that was the abnormality, not 5.25%. And the economy's proven to be remarkably resilient, notwithstanding that tightening.
Did you ever teach Econ 108 at Yale? I mean, Yale has 3 different levels of economics. They got Econ 115 for nerds. They got Econ 110, which is for PhD track Yardeni types. And then they got Econ 108 for theater majors. Did you ever teach that, Ed Yardeni?
Well, what I would teach if they took me back there as a professor is common sense. I think there's too much math being taught to economists and not enough common sense, and certainly not. They don't get their hands dirty enough with the data. There's so much data out there that they don't have a real sense of it. So I think you've got to start out with the raw material, which is data. So start out with the data and then come up with the theories and the models instead of the other way around.
And Paul, shout out here on someone that really helped form Bloomberg on the economy and Bloomberg Surveillance. Tim Besley at Yale before LSE single-handedly turned around common sense study of economic history in America. Besley at Yale was a crucible who said, stop with the math mumbo jumbo and teach Jevons of the 19th century.
So, Ed, what do you make of this economy here? I mean, as Tom was pointing out, the Atlanta GDP number looks pretty solid. Inflation seems to be coming down. We have a Fed that's probably going to be cutting rates at some point. What do you tell your clients these days?
Well, I tell them that we're in a bull market. We had a bear market back in 2022 as there was widespread expectations of a recession. It turned out to be the Godot recession. It was a no-show. And typically, we get sell-offs as we had last week. And the question is whether they become corrections. And they become corrections when there's fears that a recession's coming and then it doesn't show up. And then we get bear markets typically when a recession does show up. What was unique about 2022 is we had a bear market without the recession showing up. And I think we're in a bull market. I think this bull market, look, I can't guarantee there won't be some corrections or even another bear market along the way. But I'm sort of in the Warren Buffett and Jeremy Siegel camp that stocks are meant to be held for the long run.
Ed Yardeni with us. We're going to continue an entire half hour with Ed Yardeni. Paul, get one more question in with Dr. Yardeni. I want to come back and talk about the new model of these big tech companies.
Ed, I'd love to just have your opinion on valuation. What are you telling your clients these days about the valuation of this market?
Well, I've been doing this for a while, and I feel, one of the reasons like being a strategist, it's easy. You only have to predict 2 variables, the earnings and the valuation multiple, PE. And, getting them right, of course, is the challenge. But earnings seems to be easier than the PE. PE is like beauty; it's in the eyes of the beholder. I guess these days of political correctness, we should say a talent contest. But the reality is that the valuation multiple can be elevated as long as there's no recession up ahead here. And it's particularly elevated for the Magnificent Take them out. You get something more reasonable like 18 or 19 for the S&P 493.
We will continue with Dr. Yardeni. I can't say enough about his weekly research from his shop. It's just hugely valuable. I've been just overt out on LinkedIn and Twitter to say just shut up and subscribe, particularly for those cautious, those worried. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Vice President Kamala Harris is moving swiftly to secure Democratic delegates behind her White House campaign after President Joe Biden stepped aside amid concerns from within his own party that he'd be unable to defeat Republican Donald Trump. The Democrats' fundraising arm, Act Blue, says it raised more than $50 million in the hours after Biden left the presidential race, and Harris inherits the Biden campaign's $96 million war chest. But Bloomberg's Laura Davison reports the fundraising advantage is with the Republicans right now.
The fact here is for any Democrat, they're going to be far behind where the Republicans are. Donald Trump has been raising money, in concert with the Republican National Committee for a long time. He's had some big donors come out and pledge their support to him. Folks like Elon Musk and Timothy Mellon in recent months. Democrats have a much more expensive campaign strategy they've been running so far. Field offices and lots of expensive advertising. Donald Trump has been able to save a lot of his money that he's raised over the course of the summer. So going into the fall, Democrats, whether it's Harris or somebody else, really needs to show that they can raise money because they are far behind.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison in the nation's capital. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is expected to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris. The Financial Times reports that's according to Democratic donors and operatives familiar with the matter. Meanwhile, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin told CBS he is not running for the White House. The former Democrat, now independent, is calling for a contested primary. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is headed to Washington, leaving behind a brutal war to make a speech before a joint session of Congress. He spoke to reporters before boarding his plane.
In this time of war and uncertainty, it's important that Israel's enemies know that America and Israel stand together today, tomorrow, and always.
It's Netanyahu's fourth address before a joint session of Congress as Prime Minister. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
By popular demand, we haven't gone here in days. Michael Barr, you got to help me with this. People are worried, Paul, Sweeney, that you're safe on your Vespa. What's it like tooling around in a Vespa?
I don't go into busy roads. That's just mostly just local roads tooling around. Got the helmet, so I'm all set here. But so
the
far,
answer is just don't be stupid and get out of the Garden State Parkway.
Exactly right. So stay to the super local roads, and that's fine. That'll get you pretty much anywhere you need to go on the Jersey Shore.
Yeah, you're riding this alone, or you got help?
Oh, I got help.
You got help. You're tooling around.
Sure, fit right on the back. No problem.
You know. What do you think, Lisa? I think you sort of got a.
Do you ever ride in the back? No, yeah. You're always in
the front. Yeah, exactly. Zipping
You're
around.
never going in the back. Okay.
He sort of looks like Gregory Peck. Now that I think about it, he sort of got a Greg Peck thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's your Vespa update, folks. That's all we're doing. We're looking for the first garage check where it's going to cost them $1 million to get the thing tuned up. Does it have spark plugs?
I have no idea.
Oh, man.
It's un-American.
Exactly.
Futures up 35. The Dow up less today. The Dow up only 70. NASDAQ on a tear up 1%, recovering from the trauma here. Maybe into earnings this week. Google later this week. I'm really focused on. Bitcoin, I have to quote for Alex Steele, 68,000. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. NASDAQ futures leading the charge this morning, up about 1%. Investors look to tech earnings. We have Tesla and Alphabet reporting tomorrow. Dow futures up about 0.2%, 80 points. We have S&P futures up 0.6%, or 35 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.51%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.21%, and that's down 2 basis points. We have spot gold lower, $2,393 an ounce. Brent crude $81 a barrel. WTI crude $79 a barrel. Companies making news. McDonald's. Bloomberg reporting most of its U.S. restaurants are going to extend that $5 meal deal offer. Early performance says it's attracting more customers. It's doing what it wanted to do. It's also looking to extend the hours of operation to kind of zero in on those late night snackers. And it's the $12,000 Harvard class that celebrities are just fighting to get into. Bloomberg reports Professor Anita Elbersi's 4-day program. It's become the hot ticket. She teaches celebrities how to build empires. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and
That's
Paul.
like what Yardeni did.
Yeah.
You know, he went up to Harvard and did a 4-day course and built the Yardeni empire. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We continue with Edward Yardeni, but first, Bloomberg Surveillance, and thank you, Interactive Broker Studios, for bringing us conversations, including Dr. Yardeni. Interactive Brokers, they charge $1 margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83%. Rates subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. I am going Ed Yardeni back as a lesson, and I'm reading Michael Mauboussin from Legg Mason and Credit Suisse Forward, now at Morgan Stanley, on our world torn asunder in finance and investment. And part of that, Ed Yardeni, and you've been brilliant at this, of moving on from the conventional wisdom, say railroad stocks and Graham, Dodd, and Cottle. And one of the things Michael Mauboussin talks about is the new network effect, which is Robert Metcalfe, who invented the Ethernet, and that the network effect of what Apple does, what Google does, what tech does, is radically different than what Johnson & Johnson does, or Colgate-Palmolive, or Endicott Copper from another time and place. Do we understand in our fear and gloom the new network effect over the last 20, 30 years?
Well, I think what technology companies do better than anyone else is what Joseph Schumpeter called creative destruction. They are constantly innovating. They're constantly bringing out new technologies. And as soon as they become hits, they're working on destroying them by creating something new or the next version of that technology. So it's a extremely competitive industry. The margins are great initially, and the margins kind of evaporate very quickly as they move on to the next iteration of the innovation.
Will AI...
We all benefit from that.
Yeah. Will AI creatively destruct?
Well, artificial intelligence is certainly artificial, but I'm not convinced it's all that intelligent. But I want to be very precise about that. I think there's two versions of AI that we need to consider. One is so-called open AI, and the other one is something that I would call closed AI. Open AI basically is open to all the information available on the internet. And as we know, there's a lot of junk on the internet, and open AI is going to contribute to it. It's going to kind of start making up some stories and some sources, and I mean, we can fact check it along the way, but it's still going to be making a lot of mistakes. Closed AI is basically big data on steroids and speed using GPU chips as supercomputers. Elon Musk is a genius, and he figured out that maybe we don't need quantum computers. Maybe we can do fast computing, supercomputing with just the video chips that NVIDIA makes. Just slap them all together and you get a supercomputer. So I think a combination of massive amount of data placed on these supercomputers is in fact going to be a major productivity enhancer for every company that has a lot of data.
Ed, as we look forward, to some of your forecasts for the indexes, how much of that is earnings driven versus Fed driven. A lot of investors are not sure what to really focus on as we get into the meat of this earnings season.
Well, I think at this point it's got to be earnings driven. It's hard to imagine that valuation multiples over time can get a lot higher than where they are already. We're talking about the Magnificent Seven are at a 30 forward PE. We're talking about the S&P 500 at a 22 forward PE, and excluding the Magnificent Seven, we're at about 18 forward PE. So valuation's already pretty rich. I don't think it necessarily has to take a dive, but I think I'm looking at earnings as being the driver of the bull market from here on.
Does this market, for the longer term pull, need a pullback here of 5, 10, 15%? Is that something that you expect in the, 6 to 9 month time frame?
Yeah, well, if you look at the long history of the stock market, bear markets don't happen that often, and corrections don't happen that often. I guess just over the past several years, we got used to the idea that corrections occur on a regular basis, but they're not inevitable. History shows that some bull markets had one or two. They didn't have 5 corrections along the way. So it's not inevitable that we have to have a bear market or we have to have corrections, but you have to be realistic. They do happen along the way, and they're hard to forecast. The geniuses who tell you when to get out at the top, more often than not, forget to tell you to get back in at the bottom.
I got to get back to one final question, Yardeni. I got to get back to the trenches call. Everybody's in the trenches on this. Everybody's got a different prism, different view. And then Friday happens. And Lisa Mateos told me this. Friday's when the gloom crew shows up. They publish for the weekend, etc. How do you synthesize intelligent discussion from those cautious? How do you read the cautious fear crew in a constructive way?
Well, I think they do a great job. The problem is they just have this bias towards being perma bears. And I guess I've been accused of being a perma bull, but I think that's a consequence of reading what the perma bears are saying and just trying to provide some balance. So if you provide some balance, you come out as a perma bull. And again, if you look at the long history of the stock market, it makes more sense to be bullish on more often than bearish. But the crew, I think, provides some very good, intelligent analysis of what could possibly go wrong.
Right.
And then I step in and say, okay, well, where might they be wrong?
Ed Yardeni, thank you so much. Congratulations on your call from October of 2022. I call it the Yardeni Ancampor. I couldn't just say Yardeni. I had to drag the giant Ralph Ancampori into it as well. When it was pretty gloomy there in October of 2022, and these guys said, just acquire shares. They weren't pounded the table. They're just like, the gloom is not there. We're down 3.8% on NASDAQ. We've had a drawdown.
Exactly.
3.8%. Deep correction here on NASDAQ. It's recovered up a percentage point right now. We'll see where that ends up through the day.
And just looking at the yields here, Tom, we got the 10-year Treasury, 4.20%, the 2 years at 4.51%. Gold taking a little bit of a pause here, Tom. It had such a strong move over the past couple of months. 2,444 for gold, and WTI crude oil saying right there at 82 bucks.
Look at it, under 80.
Yeah.
79.45 on West Texas Intermediate.
Yeah.
Who benefits from a cheaper gallon of gas?
John Tucker.
Presumptive Harris or Trump? Or
I was going to say John Tucker.
John Tucker does.
So we'll get back to him. But yeah, so we'll see how the price of gas is trading. So
on a dollar check, dollar a little bit weaker here. Not much action there. Yen churning is how I'm going to put it. Euro yen for pros. Stronger yen under a 171. That's conducive to what MOF and BOJ want to do. Sterling was at a 130 on labor government celebration. Back a little bit weaker. Cable 129.18. Weaker British pound. Loonie I can't keep track of. I don't know which to look at there. Tourist dollar or loonie, I'm confused by the whole thing. But, there we are. Renminbi weakens out. That's important. Should we play Rare Earth or the Temptations? That's always a big choice. We roll with the Temptations. Get ready.
Look out, baby, 'cause here I come. And I'm
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr with us as well. All of us in together here to get a Monday started. Busy week on to Google earnings that we'll see later in the week. Equities participate. NASDAQ up 1%. The Sweeney yield There's $7.185 trillion gazillion dollars in the Sweeney bank account, 4.5% on the two-year yield. And I'm sorry, cash continues to build.
Cash continues to build there. It does. I mean, again, you're getting a solid 4.5% yield. But remember, Tom, that was just a couple months ago. That was north of 5%.
It's coming back, but I'm sorry, it's still elevated, and we're having people please extend duration.
Right.
I guess there's some point where you go, oops, but we're not there yet.
It's tough to make that call here. So again, you go out to 10 years and you're getting 4.21%, but you take away some of that reinvestment risk out there.
Good morning, Global Wall Street, 1.93% on the real 10-year yield. A little bit of inside baseball there, but that's still within the range. We've not broken down to a disinflationary tendency. A ton of economic data this week. Bloomberg Surveillance were brought to you by Build America Mutual. Build America Mutual, they insure U.S. municipal bonds that finance essential American infrastructure and provides guaranteed income. To improve any portfolio, be part of Building America, invest in BAM insured bonds. Build America Mutual, BAM insured bonds. This is a joy. Right now, after Ed Yardeni, it doesn't get better than Lori Calvasina, who, let's do the flash first. I'm all wound up by the data.
I know. There's a lot going on.
I got out front of Lisa, but she just threw a gluten-free bagel at me and said, hey, stupid. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, more intelligent, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And we've got green on the screen. Tech stocks really set to rebound from their worst week since April. Tesla, Alphabet, first of the Magnificent Seven to report tomorrow. We have Tesla shares up about 2%, Alphabet up more than 1%, NASDAQ futures up 1%, 202 points, Dow futures up about 0.1%, 66 points, S&P futures up 0.5%, 33 points. We have the 2-year yield at 4.51%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.21%, and that's down 2 basis points. On the economic calendar this week, traders looking to the Fed's preferred price gauge on Friday. Before that, we get existing home sales tomorrow, new home sales Wednesday. On Thursday, it's the government's report on second quarter GDP. To earnings we go. Verizon shares now down more than 3%. It reported operating revenue missed estimates. Fewer people, they're upgrading their wireless equipment. And shares of Delta down 1%. Its CEO, apologized, canceled the flights. CrowdStrike IT outage. CrowdStrike shares down 4%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Seriously, we'll have a report from Michael McKee, who lived this outage terribly, really brutal. Yep. And Mike did a great job at reporting it. So what you do, folks, is you look at standard deviation, which is just the variance, the vibration of a given series. Since the middle of June, I did a fitted standard deviation model in one small cap ETF has exploded 5.6 standard deviations from a negative 2.6 up to exactly 3 standard deviations up. All that in a matter of 4 weeks. Paul, that's called instantaneous.
That's called a nice rotation right there. Lori Calvasina joins us, head of U.S. equity strategy at RBC Capital Markets. How about that, Lori? Talk to us about what we've been experiencing in the market over the last several weeks, as Tom was reporting, in terms of maybe a little bit of a rotation trade out of some of those big cap AI stories into other stuff.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me as always. And look, I think when you're looking at the small caps specifically, we had attractive valuations, but more importantly, we had deeply oversold positioning. And so if you looked at, we looked at this a couple of weeks ago, but the Russell 2000 weighted median forward PE was around 14.5 times. The average is around 15.2. So decently below average. But if you looked at positioning on the CFTC data, what we had was levels of positioning that had hit in recent weeks, levels that were lower than what we saw in SVB. Now, not levels that were as bad as, say, the 2015, 2016 growth scare, or even 2022, which we think was akin to a recession, but, generally, pretty deeply oversold levels. And so then you come along, you get that CPI number that surprised everybody. Nobody had a decline in CPI on their bingo card. And then we got, a lot more confidence about the idea that the Fed can cut in September as an investment community. And so we had a reversion trade, and we had been telling people, look, we've been neutral, and we have been telling people, we're really talking to a lot of people who were kind of dour on the small cap space, and we said we wouldn't be underweight. We understand all the challenges, but when people are ready to put on the Fed bets, this space is going to move, and that's exactly what happened.
All right, we're getting into some tech earnings this week, Lori. A lot of folks are concerned, I think, that maybe the expectations, particularly for some of these big cap tech names, they're just too high. And if there's any miss from a NVIDIA or something like that, that could be a problem not only for those individual names, but also for the broader market. How do you think about some of the earnings as we get into the teeth of it here?
So I think that's a great question. We've said that this big, the issue for the rotation trade, we think the stage has been set from a valuation and positioning perspective. If you look at that mega cap growth part of the market for rotation, now is it going to happen right here and now? I do think that's really contingent upon the earnings. And we've said that the earnings season does present a very big test. And I think, where we are right now is whether you're looking at long-term earnings growth expectations or you're looking at the actual yearly numbers embedded in bottom-up consensus forecasts, that top mega cap growth cohort has really just outstripped the rest of the market in terms of forward-looking expectations and in terms of where we've been. But if you look at the forward expectations on the 2024 and 2025 numbers, they're decelerating, and the rest of the market is expected to catch up. And when you see that deceleration off extremely lofty levels, the bar is really high. Perfection is almost demanded.
Okay, so Lori, here's my world. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Apple. Okay, we got to cover Tesla. Back to Apple. Tesla, let's do JP Morgan. I looked at an ETF, Lori, and this is in the Lori Calvasina world. I don't know if you know this company, Lori. I'm catching you blind here. Fabrinet. David Mitchell, a co-founder of Seagate Technology, figures out manufacturing processing. I guess it's Thailand, Cayman Islands. It's a #1 holding of a small cap ETF. It's up 29% per year over the last 10 decades. How do our listeners and viewers get comfortable with the Fabrinets of the world if they have Apple on the brain?
So look, I obviously can't comment on any sure. individual companies, Understood. But I think the reality is that if you're looking at small caps, whether it's an individual stock, whether it's a broad-based index, you've got to see animal spirits really zooming, right? And that can come in the form of economic excitement. That can come in the form of excitement over a change in Fed policy. Some of the things I've been hearing from small cap PMs recently, they're starting to get a little bit more excited about M&A. I don't necessarily share that optimism, but that is something that we're starting to hear. So when you're exiting sort of a nervous market and you're entering into something where there's just more risk tolerance, and people are ready to look for undervalued opportunities, things that aren't quite as expensive, aren't quite as safe, that's when small caps tend to really shine. So I think that's really, kind of the question you've got to ask going forward. This Fed issue, it's a very meaningful one. It's an important one. It was something that had to happen to really get people back into small caps. But I do think going forward, we need the small caps to really demonstrate that they're competitive from an earnings growth perspective. And really, we need to get some economic tailwinds back into the market as well.
So, outside of Magnificent Seven, where do you see opportunities? Is it financials? Is it energy? What are the sectors that maybe screen well for you guys?
So I would say, if you're looking across the broader market cap landscape, financials is a sector that we like. I do think you've got better valuations down in the small cap space. We're still overweight big cap financials, but we have noticed that they don't look so cheap coming into this reporting season. They look a little bit closer to average. So I've been a little bit more intrigued by the small caps in that particular sector. Yeah, I think energy is also still, really interesting in here. And materials isn't super cheap, but I think it's cheaper than industrials as a value play.
Lori Calvasina, thank you so much. A moment of 30 days, to say the least, for small caps surging. Right now, surging. Standard & Poor's 500 up 36 points. NASDAQ advances from 1% up 1.2%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Endorsements continue to come in for Vice President Kamala Harris. Now that President Joe Biden has dropped out of the 2024 race for the White House, the president quickly endorsed Harris and encouraged his party to unite behind her. Democratic Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky made the announcement on MSNBC's Morning Joe.
I'm excited to fully endorse Vice President Harris as for the next president of the United States.
West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin reacted to the announcement. After speculation, the former Democrat, now independent, spoke this morning on CBS.
I am not running for office. I could not believe that there was not going to be a primary process or a mini process. Other countries do it. I'm not looking for I don't need that as far as in my life, the attention that people think that when you speak up, you're just looking for attention. Why is everyone afraid to speak out?
Meanwhile, praise from around the globe has come in for President Biden. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
They come in as tributes from heads of state. Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister. I respect President Biden's decision. I look forward to us working together during the remainder of his presidency. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Thanks to him, transatlantic cooperation is close, NATO is strong, and the U.S. is a good and reliable partner for us. Isaac Herzog, Israeli President. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Joe Biden for his friendship and steadfast support for the Israeli people over his decades-long career. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I've known President Biden for years. He's a great man, and everything he does is guided by his love for his country. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
The announcement comes just over a week after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump at a Pennsylvania rally. Today, the head of the U.S. Secret Service, Kimberly Cheatle, will testify before a congressional committee. Several Republicans and a Democrat have called for Cheatle to resign. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. And 9 trading days left in the MLB season, and all eyes turn, Paul. I mean, after Verlander, after Scherzer, is it Skubal out the door? What do you think, Michael Barr? There's 5 teams that can trade. One of them's a Deadly Tigers. Are they going to let him go for more draft picks than God?
Well, yes, the Tigers need to do something. And if it makes anybody feel better, I got a very quick memory. Norm Cash, 1973. I forgot all about this. And Nolan Ryan is up for, I believe, a no-hitter. And Norm Cash brings a table leg to the plate to swing. And, he's having fun with him. That was back in the day when we used to have fun.
Yes, we don't have any fun anymore.
We don't have any fun anymore.
I get the feeling they've sort of ruined the trading deadline because literally experts are telling me there's only 5 teams out of it.
Yeah.
How do you trade Pete Alonso at the Mets?
Well,
you don't.
Well, you don't.
You don't?
You really don't. And it's still, there are still, like you said, only 5 teams out. There are a lot of teams still in play. So. Yeah. The throw your hands up in the air and give up moment is not there.
Can we see Skubal at Houston with Verlander and Scherzer?
You could.
We could.
You could. I tell you right now, the Yankees need some help because I don't know what in the heck is going on now.
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
No, they need help.
Is it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What would you do, Paul? I haven't watched.
Pitching. And everybody else has just got to hit like they didn't.
You want to weigh in there, Lisa?
He's on it. He's like pitching. That's the issue. That's the big issue is pitching.
That's our baseball talk for the week. We're so buried in politics. I had to do that because of the politics thing. I'm worn out. Stay with us on politics. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
For the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advance while the dollar weakens. Tech stocks leading the advance this morning, up more than 1%, 225 points. We have S&P futures up 0.6%, 35 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 47 points. The 2-year yield at 4.51%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.22%, and that's down 2 basis points. So we have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger at 156.79 against the dollar. The euro weaker, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin down about 0.1%, around 67,000. We have spot gold lower, 2,397 an ounce. Brent crude $82 a barrel. WTI crude $79 a barrel. To earnings we go. Truist Financial down nearly 1%, recorded lower earnings in the second quarter. Net interest income that dropped, and it also took securities losses from a balance sheet repositioning. Deutsche Bank's wealth unit plans to hire a dozen private bankers in the U.S. as it chases that double-digit revenue growth. Its ADR is up 2%. And a filing shows Berkshire Hathaway sold about 34 million shares in Bank of America for nearly $1.5 billion. Bank of America shares down 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. The team did a great job starting Saturday and into Sunday, and particularly Sunday, 2 p.m., on the politics of the moment, but also staying true to what we do on economics, finance, investment. And to have Ed Yardeni on, and then Andrew Slimmon is what this show is all about. Yardeni, iconic at C.J. Lawrence, Slimmon, iconic at Morgan Stanley. We're thrilled Andrew Slimmon could join us from Chicago this morning. Andrew, I'm going to take a well-known portfolio. 56% is in their top 10 holdings. I'm going to round up and down, folks. Facebook, 14%. NVIDIA, 8%. Microsoft, 6%. Amazon, 6%. Ozempic, Eli Lilly, 3%. Apple, 3%, except they've got 9% in Berkshire Hathaway. So Apple's easily out with the Berkshire Hathaway piece. It's 6%. Andrew, is this any way to run a portfolio, or do we need to get used to large cap concentration?
Good morning. Yes and no. On the one hand, the reason for yes, this is a way to run a portfolio, is, a simple statistic is the Magnificent Seven stocks comprise 30% of the S&P. But if I look at their earnings growth over the last year, of the S&P, those 7 stocks have comprised 89% of the earnings growth. So the point I'm trying to make is, hey, the fundamentals of these companies validate big positions in them because they are some of the best performing, fundamentally driven stocks. And so it's really tough to say, I should sell these stocks just because they're big weights when, I look at what's, my success and over time in this business has always been focused on what companies are doing, less so than, kind of top down. That's the yes. The no of it is no, to the extent that these stocks are all highly, highly correlated to each other. They move together. And we have learned in the last week and a half that when there is a rotation, you better own stocks in your portfolio beyond just mega cap tech because you're going to hurt your investors. So yes, fundamentally, but you better go find some other good, fundamentally driven companies that are not all correlated to mega cap tech.
So you bring up the correlation, Andrew, and that brings up a risk that a lot of investors talk about, which is, boy, if any of these big names, whether it's an NVIDIA or Microsoft, disappoints either on earnings or guidance, that could bring not only that particular security down, but also the broader market. Is that a valid concern?
Absolutely. We've learned that. I'm dating myself. I've been in this business a long time, but that's what caused the end of the dot-com bubble is stocks. It was greater and greater concentration. Stocks got expensive, but most importantly, they started missing sales estimates. They weren't the expectation of the CapEx spend in the late 90s ran out of steam. And that because those stocks had such big weighting in the S&P, it brought down the S&P, although, the value part of the S&P did just fine. So, yes, I think fundamentals matter, but pay attention if, in fact, these companies start to say, hey, you know what, our customers aren't spending as quickly as Wall Street expected on this tech build out, that's going to be a problem for the market.
Paul, Google, in the pandemic, terrible revenue growth, 13%. They rebounded in 2021, 41% revenue growth, then 10%, then 9%, then 12%, modeling out 2025, 11%. I'm sorry, it's double GDP, double nominal GDP revenue growth, and it accumulates over a number of years, and that's how Andrew can buy the Chicago Cubs.
That's exactly right. It's compounding, and it's YouTube, Tom. There you go. So, Andrew...
They might be on sale right now, Tom.
Andrew, if I want some non-tech correlated exposure and some strong earnings behind it, where do I look?
Well, I mean, look at just all you have to do is very simple. Go look at what's worked, what's outperformed the market since the CPI print came out that Thursday, when the market said, oh, wait, maybe the Fed will cut in September. It is financials. It is industrials, right? I think following the Infrastructure Act, because I don't think it really matters who's president, we're gonna fulfill the Infrastructure Act. Those stocks have all worked. So I sit back and go, thank God for our portfolios. We have understood that these mega cap tech stocks are doing great, but when there is a rotation, you better make sure you own some other things. And I've said for a long time, I think the industrials are a great balance versus mega cap tech.
How much cash in a portfolio, Andrew, right now?
Well, look, I run long equity portfolios. If Tom Keene allocates to my portfolios, he's not allocating for me to carry, 30% cash. I'm supposed to be your equity guy.
Right.
I think the market is going to continue to rally until we get through the second quarter earnings, because I do think they're going to be good. But then I get nervous as we get into August, because there's kind of a lack of fundamental news. The other thing that I would tell you is, at a time when seasonally it makes sense to kind of get a little bit more conservative, if you look at what's worked, not only value, but it's the highest of the high beta stocks. Doesn't seem to me the time of year you want to chase high risk stocks.
One final question, 30 seconds. How come the White Sox are so much fun to watch, and the Cubs, it's like pulling teeth? What is going on in Chicago?
Because of expectations. The Cubs are expected to do well. No one expects the White Sox to do well.
There we go. We'll leave it right there. Andrew Slimmon, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it, with Morgan Stanley as well. Victoria over at Banyan, she's diehard White Sox.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, she's diehard. She's,
I love that. Not being from Chicago, I don't fully appreciate the dynamics of
like
White Sox
no other
fans
polarity.
Cubs. Yeah.
I never, I'm not, Arthur Levitt was wonderful at this. I'm not knowledgeable of the New York City polarity.
Right.
There's no equivalent in sport.
Yep.
I mean, north side, south side. it's really pretty cool, actually. And that's great. I mean, you have Yardeni and Slimmon and with Lori Calvasina. I mean,
that's not bad.
I'm still in triple leveraged all cash. I haven't, maybe I'll wait for
now you're getting paid for it, at least. Now you're getting a yield.
We're getting paid, but the expenses have gone up. And net clean, we did have a 2-20 payout two quarters ago on triple leveraged all cash, but it's a struggle. Our ETF is in registration with Eric Belchunas.
Oh, very good.
We're thinking
he's in charge.
His lawyers say we got to go Forple cash, but Forple leverage, but we'll see. We have to trade. We're open in 4 minutes. The market lifts. There's no other way to put it. NASDAQ up 1.2%. S&P up 0.7%. I'll let you decide what that means about America's political system. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So how are the markets going to react after President Joe Biden ended his re-election campaign, endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris? Will there be excitement ahead of tech earnings? We have Tesla, Alphabet set to open their books tomorrow, the first of the Magnificent Seven to report. So much to consider, so let's get right to the numbers. We have the S&P 500 up 0.7%, 40 points, 5,544. We have the Dow up 0.2%, 108 points at 40,392. The NASDAQ up more than 1%, 197 points, 17,923. We have the two-year yield at 4.52%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.22%, and that's down 1 basis point. We have spot gold lower, $2,396 an ounce. Brent crude $81 a barrel. WTI crude $79 a barrel. Checking with currencies, a dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger, euro weaker, British pound stronger. And at the open, we'll want to check in with Verizon. It reported operating revenue missed estimates. Right now, it's down 4%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. One of the great certainties that we have seen so far is a question of where business and Wall Street fit into the politics of the nation. It's been a divide of Wall Street and Main Street for many a year. A huge tension there, and I'm not going to mince words, between the haves and the have-nots, of widening polarization. Somebody that's studied this carefully is Jeannie Scienziano with Iona University, a Bloomberg contributor here on the politics of this weekend and our politics forward. Jeannie, Glenn Youngkin will join our Guy Johnson. He is of Virginia. I'm going to call it sort of kind of like a purple state. He is a guy that did well at Carlyle. He's a businessman, and he wasn't picked. It's that simple. Are both parties anti-business, anti-Wall Street into the November election?
You know, they seem to be. I just think back to when you saw former President Trump and President Biden both running to join the union, President Biden being the first president to step on the union line. And so there does seem to be a way in which Wall Street and business is getting blamed for the predicament we are in. And of course, you mentioned the selection of J.D. Vance over somebody like a Glenn Youngkin is indicative of that. I think that speaks to the fact that people on the ground, on Main Street, as you call it, are feeling so much frustration with where we are in the country, both economically and politically, and are looking for somebody to blame. And of course, you find Democrats blaming industry, business organizations, Wall Street, and Republicans who used to have the back of business doing the same. And so this is where we find ourselves today. And I don't expect that'll change much with the change over the weekend from Biden to Harris or whoever the Democrats end up running with.
So, Jeannie, just with a couple of minutes here of ability to look back and see what happened over the weekend, was that a good weekend for the Democratic Party, do you think? We'll look back.
I wouldn't say it was good, but it was better than the previous 3 weeks. We all saw that debate. Joe Biden, the writing was on the wall. You cannot put that genie back in the bottle, so to speak. Once he came out and people saw that this was the state of the president, they did not feel comfortable voting for him for another 4 years. And so I think it should have happened sooner. It was about 21, 26 days between the debate and this weekend. So from that perspective, it is a better shot for the Democrats now. And of course, all Democrats, or most Democrats, knew that. We understood if he didn't come out yesterday, you had about 20 senators, Democratic senators, in the waiting to release a letter.
Wow.
And they're doing this because they feel their jobs are on the line.
Jeannie, what would you recommend the Democratic Party do now moving forward? Move forward with Harris, or maybe open up the competition?
I think they move forward with Harris, given the structure of our system. I don't think they have much of a choice, especially since nobody is coming out yet to challenge her. If somebody is, they need to do that now, as there's less than a month to the convention. But also, I think they need to make this campaign about Donald Trump, whoever this campaign is about is likely to lose. It's been about Joe Biden and the Democrats, hence they're losing in the polls. So make it about Trump, not Harris.
Right. Give me scope and scale here, Jeannie. I've just been trotting around the internet as Paul asks smarter questions. And the bottom line is the vice president and her husband, all in, they've got a net worth of 10 million, 11 million, whatever. Most of that is in her husband's name. She's worth 2 million, whatever the number is. I looked at Teresa Hines with John Kerry, and even there, with all that ketchup money, she's worth 1 billion or so. A lot of estimates, led by Tim O'Brien's expertise at Bloomberg, is President Trump is worth $6 billion. This goes back to the founding fathers. Do we care about the gradations of wealth of our candidates?
You know, I think people really were attracted to President Trump, quite frankly, because the amount of money he had allowed him to say, and voters believed that he was going to be independent of the Washington swamp, so to speak. So I do think from that perspective, a lot of voters do care because they know how much it costs us to run these elections. And if you're not independently wealthy, you are then asking for money and beholden to those people who you are getting money from. So I do think it matters an awful lot. And I think, you know, Kamala Harris is going to have to address that.
When do you think we hear from President Obama, and what will his message be?
Good question.
From President Obama, I think President Obama is going to wait until we see the delegates come out and cast their votes. I think President Obama is of the mindset like Nancy Pelosi. They don't want this to be a coronation. President Biden, I think, needs to come out and speak as soon as possible. I know he is ill, but I think the waiting has raised a lot of suspicion about his health and whether he can continue for the next 6 months.
Jeannie, thank you. Professor Zeno at Iona University as well. An important conversation. Our Guy Johnson with the governor of Virginia are coming up. Paul, I think the last time we trotted out Youngkin's name, he was on a vice president's list.
Yes.
I mean, it's that simple.
Yep, absolutely. Now he's obviously the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The capital is Richmond, Virginia. So I'm pretty familiar with Richmond, that part of the world. So again, they're out at the Farnsborough Air Show.
Is Virginia, from where you sit, is it a purple state?
I think it is. I mean, it's like a lot of states here. It feels purplish to me, I guess is the way I'd answer it. Certainly up by the Capitol, much more, it's just, you have the Capitol, then you have the rural, then you have Richmond.
What's the name of the air show?
Farnsborough, outside of London. It's where the Boeings and the Airbuses try to sell lots of airplanes to airlines.
Well, there's a huge tension there. We've had some coverage there, particularly off our London platform earlier this morning, of the tension between Boeing and Airbus with all that's going on with Boeing in the United States. Frankly, with what France is going on as well. This is an opportune time. Our Guy Johnson in London, speaking with the governor of Virginia. He is Glenn Youngkin, of course, with his work for years at Carlisle, and some would say his surprise as his election as the governor of Virginia. Here now in the United Kingdom, our Guy Johnson.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, we welcome now our radio and our television audiences together as we speak to the governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin. Governor, thank you very much indeed for stopping by once again to join us.
Great to be with you. And we were together last year in Paris, and here we are in Farnborough, and there's a lot of planes flying today.
We've hopefully got a quiet patch in the air display that you and I can have a conversation and we can both hear each other. So that's fantastic. Look, the big news obviously over the last 24 hours is Joe Biden stepping aside. Yeah. A, is this a surprise? B, what does it mean, do you think?
Well, so I'm a Republican governor, and so I'm seeing it from the other side, but the amount of pressure that his party was placing on him to step aside was enormous, and there has been chaos in the Democratic Party, and we've all watched it with the performance, of course, of Joe Biden's administration and the realization that Donald Trump is now ahead in polls in states that Joe Biden won by 10 points, like Virginia, where Joe Biden won by 10 in 2020. And now Donald Trump is either even or up in the polls. And on top of that, you really do see Joe Biden faltering on his ability to campaign. So, no, not a huge surprise. I do think that it's important that the polls really haven't moved much in the last day. Right. And I think that reflects the fact that Virginians and Americans recognize that it was the Biden-Harris administration, and she owns the performance. And it's not going to be any different than the one that Joe Biden had.
Sounds like you think they should select somebody else.
Well, it's their choice to select who they want, but I will say that they haven't really selected anybody yet. And I do think the chaos that we've seen in the Democratic Party selection process is only matched by the chaos that they've unleashed on the world and the country. We've had foreign policy chaos, and I firmly believe that if Donald Trump were president, we wouldn't have war in Ukraine, we wouldn't have the chaos in the Middle East that we have, nor would we see China threatening Taiwan like they are. And if Donald Trump were president, we would certainly have a secure border, and therefore every state like Virginia wouldn't be seeing the violence, the drug overdoses, and the illegal immigrant crisis that we've got. And if Donald Trump were president today, I don't think we would have seen the runaway inflation that Joe Biden unleashed and Kamala Harris on America.
So if it is Kamala Harris, do you think Virginia is still winnable? Does it change the arithmetic in any shape or form?
I think that Virginia is still in play. And what we're seeing, of course, is Virginians are stating that they want strong leadership, not weak leadership. They know that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden led this administration together, and that track record is her track record. And I think that Americans are reflecting the same sentiment. They're ready for strength in the White House, not weakness.
Why do you think that the Ukraine war wouldn't have happened if President Trump had been around and running things at that point in time?
Because I think he projects strength. And we know that there is peace through strength. And Joe Biden, starting with his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, all the way through to placating China, to empty threats on the international stage, only elicits other countries to do bad things. I mean, he completely funded the Iranian assault in the Middle East, because when Joe Biden became president, he undid all of the sanctions and all of the isolation that Donald Trump had placed them in.
Let's just stick with Ukraine if we can for a moment. Would the Republican Party continue to support Ukraine? Should the Republican Party, should President Trump and his vice president continue to support Ukraine? Do you think that aid should be there?
Well, let me just begin with the clear statement that the Republican Party as a whole is for defeating Putin. I think what we'll see, of course, is all elements brought together. First thing we'll do is we will secure the border. And that has been the biggest complaint from the Republican Party, is we're sending a lot of money overseas and we haven't even secured our own border. And I think on day one, President Trump will secure our border and stop the chaos that has ensued with illegal immigration. Listen, we've had terrorists come across the border, and we had two illegal immigrants try to crash the front gate at Quantico Marine Corps Base in a box truck in Virginia. And, of course, the free flow of drugs is killing people left, right, and center. We have 5 a day that on average die in Virginia. Job one, secure the border. And then I do believe that support around the world in order to bring peace back through strength will be real. And this is the double approach that I think we'll see under a Trump administration.
Because from a European perspective, it looks like we're going to see a more isolationist government were Trump to win.
Well, I do think what we're going to see is a government that is, one, going to be very clear about what we're going to do, and one that is going to require all of our partners to play a full role. And I believe our partners will. I think what
does it playing a full role mean then? Is that 2.5% NATO? Is that 3.5% NATO? What is that?
Well, I think historically it was asking NATO to pay 2% of their GDP in defense, and we've seen a lot of the NATO countries come there. Not all of them, but I think this is also a recognition that Putin is not going to stop at the Ukraine, and everybody needs to do their fair share.
Yep. So is 2.5 enough? Is 3? Where's the number in your mind?
Well, that's going to settle out as we see what the overall spending is going to be to do what we need to do. But I will say this, that I think that the United States will constantly be a great partner, but we also require great partners. And I think that's really that's what Peace Through Strength is all about.
The debate here at the Farnborough Air Show is, if we have to spend more money, we're going to try and spend it here. A lot of the defense companies are based in your state. You comfortable with that? If Europe's going to spend more money, should Europe spend that money domestically?
Well, again, there's going to need to be a capabilities match to the need. And a lot of the capabilities have been developed in the United States.
Do you think Europe's capable of doing that?
I think there are certain elements, yes. and there are certain areas where the U.S. capabilities are going to be paramount. And I think the combination of that is really important. We've got a lot of European companies that want to come set up in the United States. A lot of them want to come to Virginia. It's one of the main reasons why I'm here. You may have heard we were ranked top state in America for business, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of them want to come to Virginia. But this idea of European companies coming to the United States and manufacturing and building is really important. And I do think the blending of capabilities on the global stage will provide the best outcomes.
One of the reasons they might be coming to the United States to manufacture is because they're worried about tariffs. Should they be worried about tariffs?
Well, I think they should be worried about tariffs if their country is imposing tariffs on the United States goods. And again, free trade has not always meant free trade, and I think it needs to be fair and reciprocal. And when we look at just the evolution of the trade agreements with China over the last few decades, China had unlimited access to the U.S. market, restricted access to their market, and it wasn't until President Trump struck a really tough China trade deal that we began to really treat them like they are, which is really an adversary who's trying to dominate the world, and they're doing it, yes, through economic coercion and imperialism, but also through military saber rattling, and their surveillance of the world is unparalleled, and so we have to treat them as such, and that means we've got to stand up and use the tools in our toolkit in order to combat it.
Would those tariffs with the tools that you're talking about being in the toolkit, if they were applied, do you think that's inflationary for the average American?
The short answer is competition is what combats inflation. And as long as we have strong competitive markets, then the short answer is most likely not. But what we do need to recognize is that what is inflationary for the average American is unlimited runaway spending, which is what we saw in the Biden administration. It was irresponsible. They flooded the market with government spending on an unnecessary basis, and that's why we saw inflation like we haven't seen for four decades. And that's why the average American, when they go to the grocery store, they literally, it's a gut punch every time they go in. Gas prices are run away from them, and why 66% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck because they can't keep up with the runaway inflation we've seen over the last 3.5 years.
Governor, great to see you. Thanks for stopping by to see us. Always a
God
pleasure.
Bless you. Come to Virginia.
I will look forward to it. I've been, I love it.
Guy Johnson there with a manly interview on an airfield with an Emirates back in the distance and a C-something, I don't know, a Globemaster, a transport plane behind. And the voice in the background was like from a James Bond movie.
Right.
Where Sean Connery's going through the terminal. Everyone looks like David Gura.
It's an air show with that all the jets fired up behind them.
It is. The governor from Virginia there with our guy, Johnson. We're going to try to summarize up here all that is in front of us. And I really want to look forward here. We'll get news here from the Democratic Party. David Gura joins us now to give us guidance here with the big take out this morning, and I'm sure they're working on the next iteration of it as well. David, what do we expect Harris to say to the elites of the Democratic Party, to the donors? Doesn't she have to say, let's go?
Absolutely, and we know that she was on the phone for hours and hours yesterday reaching out to them. So these are members of Congress, but big donors as well, governors across the country, superdelegates, trying to get their support, trying to get them to rally behind her many weeks now ahead of that convention in Chicago. So yes, it's let's go, let's do this.
Has anyone said, Manchin for a cup of coffee, and then all of a sudden Manchin saying, I'm not going to run. Has anyone said no?
No one has said no within the Democratic Party explicitly. Manchin on the fence wants to see the platform. That's what he told CBS News and CNN this morning. But we still haven't heard from Chuck Schumer in the Senate, Hakeem Jeffries in the House. President Obama, in a long statement yesterday, spent most of his time praising President Biden. He didn't come out and endorse Kamala Harris explicitly. So there are some senior Democrats who haven't yet come out and endorsed her explicitly. But nobody yet has come out publicly and said, no, she's not the right candidate for the moment.
Do we know what Vice President Harris plans to do in the coming days in terms of campaigning, getting off to a strong start?
Public appearance at the White House today, other events, other campaigning that's on the schedule. There are a couple of high-dollar fundraisers that were planned for President Biden that we understand she's going to take over the lead on. They're going to continue. She's going to be there in all likelihood.
Is one of them at the Gura House?
Right, yeah. She will not be making her way to the Gura House. In either Chapel Hill or Brooklyn, no.
What are the horse divorce like at one of these
I'll check the freezer when I get home and see what we can unthaw for you, Tom. But No, it is incredible. Just to step back, it's incredible how much money these raise. And I should say the next big kind of marquee fundraiser I have my eye on is former President Trump is going to Nashville for the Bitcoin conference. And I think a ticket to that fundraiser is more than $800,000 to meet him on the sidelines.
Whoa, stop the show. Is Belchunas going to this thing, Paul?
Probably.
Maybe
I'm sure he's a featured speaker
Katie
somewhere.
Greifeld
Check the
will be
credit
there,
card.
but-
Check the credit card receipt.
Unbelievable. At 11:30 today, we're scheduled to take the vice president. I know, Paul, you want to jump in. David, quickly, is Biden appearing with Harris at this 11:30
I don't think
moment?
that we know the answer to that. So the next big appearance from President Biden we're waiting to see is that speech that he said that he's going to give in that letter yesterday. In the coming days, he's going to explain this decision to the American people. Still no detail on what that's going to look like or where that's going to be. And of course, he's been recovering from COVID over these last few days. So that's what we're keeping our eye on. That's what we want to see, sort of how he explains this to the American people.
Is there an expectation that Vice President Harris is up to the task? Is there a belief that she is, simply because she was on the ticket, she is the sitting vice president? Or is there real concerns out there that she may not be?
Many millions of people voted for this ticket with both of them on it. Yep. And in that is the tacit understanding that if something were to have happened to President Biden, she would have stepped in. So there are people who voted for the ticket who feel comfortable with her. I mean, I think that there are people who are expressing doubt about what they. I mean, she's had a fairly low profile, as many vice presidents do. So I think this is a moment for her to step out, explain herself, talk about her background and what she believes in. And you look at what Republicans are saying, the Trump campaign in particular, Tom, they're really trying to tie her to Joe Biden. Said that she was in the passenger seat as he drove the car. So well see how much that sticks with the American people.
I was on my third gimlet yesterday, and
I lost count. Lost count, Tom.
And I got a message from Mrs. Keene, and as usual, there's some really intelligent stuff in there as well. If President Trump is elected, what will he do the first day? Does he sit there at the desk like he likes to do, with the pad, signing that big Donald Trump signature? David, what will he take away the first day?
He's talked about taxes, he's talked about tariffs, who knows, but you're right. He approaches the job, or he has approached the job with a real level of flourish, and during the course of that convention, talked about how busy that first day is going to be. Setting that aside, I think there's a lot of fear among Democrats about what isn't going to happen on the first day, but might happen on the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 10th, 15th. There are these ambitious plans to rework a lot of the what they refer to as the deep state, the kind of bureaucratic apparatus in Washington, D.C. Hear a lot about this 2025 platform. There's more than that. So yes, I think were he to win, we'd expect some sort of announcement with flourish on that first day. But really,
the border,
I think the Democrats
can he change the border in one signature?
I'm skeptical of that, but we have seen President Biden sort of deal with these asylum cases, and I remarked on this during the course of the speech at the convention. He put up the chart that was on display when he was shot at in Pennsylvania, and that shows this stark decline in encounters that Border Patrol had with people crossing the border when he was president, and then shooting up when President Biden came in. And he remarked at the convention, this is an old chart. In recent months, we have seen that number go down precipitously. So we are seeing gains there. But this is the thing that's going to dog Vice President Harris's candidacy, if in fact she is the nominee. If you go back to March 2021, President Biden did her the lousy favor of saying she's going to be the border czar. And this is the thing that she's going to be pinned with and have to defend herself on. This was part of her remit, huge part of her portfolio. And I should say for most of this administration, it's been a thing that I think people have been largely dissatisfied with. So how she gets around that, how she separates herself from that, how she draws attention to the fact that, yes, things have changed recently, that's going to be a huge hurdle for her to overcome, I think.
And I guess we're still up in the air whether the party's fully behind Vice President Harris or perhaps open to a more open competition. How does that play out? Does she just assume she's the candidate and just goes?
She is acting like that. And, we had the Biden campaign transfer its staff to her yesterday. That was the announcement made by the head of that campaign. They're moving full speed ahead. That's the attitude they're taking. And to your point about a brokered convention, that happens if someone within the party declares his or her intent to run for the nomination. Haven't seen that happen yet. We were talking about Joe Manchin a few minutes ago. He really made the rounds this morning.
Yes.
He was on every major TV network, and his message evolved a little bit over the course of the morning. The first hit that he did on CNN was saying, I think we need to make sure that centrists are heard in this country. That's the role that he wants to play. By the time he got to CBS, he was parroting that, but he was also saying he's not going to run. I think that's the big headline for this morning. People thought that he'd be a huge thorn in the side of Democrats. He says he's not going to run for president.
What's the next theme for Big Take? Come on, get out front. Give us a window.
What we're looking toward is this meeting that, yes, President Biden's going to have with Prime Minister Netanyahu on Wednesday, but Kamala Harris is reportedly going to have a separate meeting with the Prime Minister as well. So what does that look like? What do they talk about? What does that relationship look like going forward? And, of course, what does it mean for the conflict more broadly? So we're thinking about doing something perhaps with Ethan Bronner, our colleague in Israel. Wonderful, and decades of experience in the region. What does it say about her as a policymaker, as somebody in foreign policy? That's another big question, too, is how she approaches that.
David Gura, thank you. David Gura working tirelessly through the weekend. The Big Take is the podcast, but much, much more. David Gura doing politics for America and for Bloomberg as well. I guess the market's up. I mean, it's something, Paul, to talk about. The Dow's up fractionally. NASDAQ with a big rebound given, the gloom of last week. We sort of come right back here on a Monday is where I'd put it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Russell up only 0.3% today versus the NASDAQ up 1.5%. So, kind of getting back into some of those tech names. And again, Tom, it's a big earnings week starting tomorrow after the close. Your favorites, Google and Tesla.
Are they tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
I did not know that. I thought they were later in the week.
Yep. So they kick us off, and so that'll be interesting. That'll be one of the couple of those names that are really going to set the tone for technology and kind of the expectations.
Small matter. West Texas Intermediate, $79 a barrel.
Yeah.
Looking at 78. We're not there yet. We've had fun today. We're doing Motown today,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We did it for Mike. But Bar said, just Tom, stop with it. Play some Motown. Perfect. There's only one song. Smokey Robinson, Pete Moore, and Marv Tarplin. The Tracks of My Tears. Good morning.
Deep inside